Okay, had a lot of thoughts for today. We are, of course, continuing with the phase 2, looking at how to know what's true, and we can also look at that idea even as a subset of how do we seek understanding or how do we gain understanding. Then I had more and more thoughts that finally came together toward the end, or I had a lot, but then the question is what to include first, right, what to say first. But then I had a couple, one insight and 2 or 3 or 4, and then they kind of ended up getting on the slide that I figured I'd put before the other one. So a couple of thoughts and notes. One that kind of came up when I was talking to Mike, last webinar, we had the kind of special interlude one where I talked about playing to win. And it's certainly a real secret, or I don't know if it's a secret, but it's a technique that I use consistently that's very helpful. And there's a lot more I could have said or I planned to say about that at some point. And here, I guess one of those some points is right now. I probably said this, but I want to emphasize it, that when we imagine having one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake or whatever, then what we want to do, it's not that deciding whether to go for a win on a particular strategic or tactical objective is bad. So it's not that deciding whether to do it is bad. But what is definitely bad is doing that at the same time you're trying to play. At the same time, and play means at the same time you're going for the objective. If you're on the mission, if you're doing a project with someone, or even if you're in a conversation with somebody, and there's an objective, then, or on a date or whatever, then basically you want to separate, as an activity, you want to separate, like it's perfectly reasonable at times to have your foot on the brake, right? Like when there's a red light, when there's a car, when you would hit something. And then there's other times you want to have your foot on the gas. And the critical thing to realize is not to be pressing both of them at the same time, right? And so it's a great thing to decide whether you want to go for a particular objective. It's just that you want to learn to kind of fully separate those things. And in practice, people often don't. Many people might even separate them if someone stopped them and said, wait a second, do you really want to be deciding whether to go for this at the same time as you're going for it? And this could come up in something as simple as you're in a relationship, business or romantic or whatever, with somebody, and they say something that just kind of rubs you the wrong way, or they're doing something that's just kind of maybe a little bit annoying or not what you want, and you respond to them in a way where really that response can only come from a place of like whether you at that moment really kind of feel like being in a relationship with them or not, right? Like there are certain responses that we might do where if we stopped and were clearly focused on I definitely want to be in a relationship with this person long term, then it wouldn't make any sense to respond to them in a way that was kind of snippy or whatever it might be, right? So that's just an example of a simple example of how we meander out of playing to win and meander into kind of playing as if we're not really sure whether we want to win, right? In something. And so just separate those two. And if you don't separate them on purpose by having clarity regarding what you're going after and that you're going after it, and that for some specified amount of time, including just until you achieve it, could be one of those things, could be one of those specifications. But whatever the specification is, you do it in advance and separately, and then set yourself up so within whatever parameters you're just playing to win. And a related thing that's not on sorry, let me interrupt myself with a quick thing. It could be that you've done that, you're playing to win, and then because of a set of circumstances, you think, all right, at some time soon I'm going to schedule a separate piece of time and space for myself where I'm going to think about whether I want to continue to play to win with this. And that might also, when you are thinking about whether you want to continue, right? You're in a relationship, you've been playing to win for a while, but you're starting to think that maybe you want to rethink that. That doesn't mean that right at that moment when you have that thought, you want to then put your foot on the brake while it's on the gas. keep it on the gas only, but just realize, wait a second, I'm going to, at some time soon, I will have a separate mental space situation where I'm going to think it through. And as part of thinking it through, you still want to follow through probably on whatever's immediately been agreed to and what you're in the middle of in most every case. The only time when you might not, in particular, is like if you're, certainly if it involves violating property rights, then you pretty much just don't want to do that, period, even in the middle, right? Then you could kind of slam on the brake whenever. But that's why we have that distinction, so we know that's the time, and really there's not much else. And then if something just really could take you out, like really put you in danger, if they're driving and it's very dangerous, then you might just say, let me out, on the side of the road, right? But literally, right? I mean, or if they're going to take drugs that could be dangerous or whatever. But anyway, I give those more as a extreme comparison to otherwise you want to finish the task that you're doing, set a time apart, and mostly not, and not be like just itching to even do that. Mostly you want to follow through and not be thinking whether you want to be doing so. And then I interrupted and I was going to add a thought. One of the things that I don't think I mentioned on the Playing to Win webinar either, that I could say I meant to, or just with all of Alchemy, I don't mean to get to anything on one particular webinar. That's why we have a lot of them. But it's worth mentioning now just because it's pretty cool and easy and related to the previous webinar. There are people, like we're how do I, sorry, a little bit of a traffic jam of thoughts, as that happens sometimes, a few things at once. And I was mentioning to Mike last night on the phone, we were just poking around, talking and sharing some thoughts, and I was developing some ideas, as we often do. And I was pointing out that, and we were thinking about helping people, right, and members, and thinking about the idea of the offer and so forth. And I was saying that it's kind of cool when you think about joint venturing with people, then it adds, in one sense, it adds the complexity of joint venturing, but what it does do is that you can joint venture with people in order to collaborate on an offer. Right? The thing about an offer is that it has to be powerful or valuable enough that people are going to pay money for it. And so it's a threshold, right, that you're trying to get over, where you're making something people want to pay for. And if you joint venture well, then you get to have other people contribute to getting you over the offer over that threshold, right? And so you don't even need the whole piece. You can just have a part of the piece, or a piece of, I guess you don't need the whole pie or whatever. The whole thing that's going to get you over the threshold you don't need. And so joint venturing can really be terrific, right? There's all sorts of potential pitfalls, but if you get those right, then you don't have to make the whole offer that people want to pay for yourself, right? You can work on that with other people. Given that, then one way or the other, life and business life can be way easier when you're teaming up with people. And who do you want to team up with, right? You ideally want to team up with high-powered people, right? People that are playing to win. Well, people that are playing to win, they sense it if other people are playing to win, and you're only going to get in that club if you yourself are playing to win. And if you're giving off signals of where it's like you're giving off signals of someone that's thinking whether they want to win, right? And part of that, a lot of that is when there's just other goals that you're clearly going after that aren't the mission of the joint venture, and you're treating them as important in a way, and letting people kind of see that you treating them as important, even just things like recreation or needing to do stuff with your family. Of course, you may need to do those things in your life, but there's a way that sometimes people will act like it's sort of an entitlement, or that it's clearly just as important. Anyway, you can determine what's important to you for sure, but there's certain benefits that you're not going to get if you're going to want to treat recreation and certain aspects of family time and certain amounts of vacation time and this, that, and the other thing as equally important as a task that you might be collaborating on in a joint venture, then there's just various high-powered people that realistically aren't going to work with you. Or if they do, they're going to kind of end up calibrating their efforts to yours, and it's all going to kind of not work that great. And someone else is also going to be able to take your partners away from you, right? Like by being more all in, by if they're there to play to win. And this is the same thing in a romantic relationship. If you're thinking about whether you want to be in it, then that's going to come across, and anyone who's going to be interacting with your partner, flirting, whatever, in a way where they're not giving off that they're wondering whether they want to be in it, but they're more all in, is generally going to be able to take them away from you, right? And that can create a negative spiral where you feel that, like you feel like someone else could take them away, then you feel more jealous, and then you behave in ways that further undermine the relationship, and then you make it even easier for someone to take something away from you. When you're really focused in a playing to win sort of way, and all you need to do is just quarantine off other parts of your life that are necessary, and try to have a way for them not just be all that visible in kind of an in-your-face way and so forth. But anyway, there's just like I've talked about in a different recording, but not in Alchemy, there's benefits you can only get. This is kind of a parallel truth that's related, but it's not the exact same point. There's benefits you can only get from commitment, which has its own costs, right? When you commit to something, and when you prioritize something over other things, there's benefits you can only get from doing that you just can't get otherwise, and you want to at least think of that in terms of alternative use, right? So if you are going to prioritize, if you need to take 2 weeks off of vacation, and that's just that, then there's that'll just lock you out of a certain level of joint venture or commitment from business partners, potentially. And you might say, well, that's not fair, or, well, then I don't want to work with partners like that. Totally reasonable, as long as it's an alternative use decision, right? As long as you just get that. But the interesting thing is that with a sort of total commitment that's realistic, but does involve prioritization, with a sort of total type of commitment, either romantically or in business, you can ensure sort of ongoing loyalty and return commitment from someone, where you're not really going to have someone lose that partnership in this kind of surprising way, generally. And so there's not really a right answer there. The right answer is to understand that and to just sort of be as intentional as you can about it. And then what you can do is you can go on a trip, or you can have your family time, but find a way to almost collaborate with your partners in a way where you sort of maintain the full commitment within reason to the partnership, but then find a way to plan and fit in the vacation, but in a way where the priority, again, you're going to get a benefit from a certain type of total commitment, or a certain type of absolute, maybe not absolute, but some sort of priority to certain relationships or business ventures that you're just not going to get without making it that type of priority. And if you're not willing to do that, then just understand that it's a trade-off and decide on which trade you want to make. But I myself chose to have a sort of absolute priority for a couple of years while I was really getting OMG machines working, because it was a fairly unique or totally unique in my particular life type of opportunity, where Mike and Greg were willing to trust me totally for doing what I did. I don't mean with every aspect of their life or not, but within the parameters of building OMG and what I was trying to do, then there was a type of total trust. And it was, and they're just such high-powered, talented people who are ready to do the same thing, who are ready to really focus as well. that it was worth doing that. And then I wasn't just like, well, look, guys, I'm going to take a 2-week vacation right now, regardless of what you guys think, because I just want to. Things could have worked either way, perhaps, but maybe they couldn't, and I wasn't really looking to find that out. And at least it sends a signal where everyone kind of dials it back, right? And when you're getting a business off the ground, you're trying to get over a threshold of launch, right, of escape velocity, and you don't necessarily know exactly what that threshold is. And so I didn't really want to cut corners just sort of randomly. It wasn't worth it to me. And the benefit is I got what I got. I'm not even telling you whether it's worth it or not. I certainly wouldn't want to do things differently right now, but you have to make your own decisions based on your current life. But I've generally gotten a lot of mileage out of finding a way to have a total commitment within certain boundaries, but I keep those boundaries pretty nicely large, at certain times where I can just go and get over a threshold with something. And now I still have a certain type of commitment, almost in this case with more of a floor, with making sure OMG Machines works very well, but I'm not really at this point needing to get it over a threshold that I can't really tell what it takes. So I can differently, I don't need to perform at that quite same total level, or when my phone's like always on, and where if it's in the middle of the night I'll get up, or if I'm about to go on a date I would just not, for the first couple of years basically I would do that, and I had a family situation where I was able to do that. Okay, just some thoughts there about that. I'm going to give you some kind of somewhat random thoughts here, but it ties back to the past webinar, and then as we kind of transition to this one, which this webinar will tie back to the last Saturday's webinar and continue with phase 2. We're talking about understanding. But skipping down to the bottom thing here, there's a holographic nature to anything we'll talk about, where it's all going to be kind of a demonstration of alchemy, of the concept of alchemy, the kind of core idea that I'm looking to get over to you. Any topic we talk about is, again, it's kind of in a hologram. If you cut out part of a hologram, like if you have a hologram that's 2 inches by 2 inches, and you cut off a centimeter by centimeter corner of it, and you shine a light through just that part or reflect it, then you're going to get the whole picture of the hologram. It might be a little more blurry, but you get the whole picture. So each piece kind of contains the whole in it, and so alchemy is sort of like that. So whatever topic I'm talking about, it's going to be containing the basic ideas of the method of understanding and so forth, and problem solving and all that's part of alchemy, or that kind of is alchemy, mixing ideas to get the results we want, and looking at the elements of clusters of ideas in order to like the idea of what I mean by a cluster of idea might just be money, or business, or a joint venture. The idea of a joint venture is actually a cluster of ideas, right? And so as we dig down into the elements of a joint venture, and then one of the elements of a joint venture might be your own mind, and then if we understand the elements of your mind, right, and then one of the elements of your mind might be goals, and then we understand the elements of goals, right? So we're digging down, zooming in. That's the kind of dissolving or zooming in or breaking things into the elements, part of alchemy. And then we discover all these elements. And then we have these elements and building blocks of ideas, right? If we're trying to figure out joint ventures and we dig down to understanding the mind, we dig down to understanding goals, and then we understand distinctions about goals at a fundamental elemental level, then those distinctions and building blocks are going to help us with more than just joint ventures, right? It's going to help us with pretty much everything in life if we understand our mind and goals more distinctly and understand elements of those ideas. This idea of playing to win, right, is going to affect us in pretty much every aspect of our lives. So that's the holographic nature of alchemy and what alchemy is, right? Digging down to elements and then recombining those elements into new clusters that are also just what we want, right? Then we can construct a joint venture, or our understanding of a joint venture, and then actual joint ventures and actual consulting relationships where they're created, the cluster is just what we want. It doesn't have like kind of bad berries, right? It doesn't have bad ideas mixed in with good ideas. Once we get down to the elements and then construct it just how we want. And even before we can do that perfectly, we can do it better than we did before, right? Even when we understand some elements of the things I talked about, joint ventures, minds, goals, as we get more distinctions, as we get more clarity, then we'll be making improvements along the way to perfection. So it's not like perfection or nothing. But shooting for perfection is necessary, or else everything just kind of breaks down. If we don't shoot for perfection, then our mind takes over and just comes up with whatever goals and standards that are already within the box. So the only way to reliably take control of our minds, in quotes, in essence, in the right way, is to be shooting for perfection of understanding. But then the pursuit of that will keep giving us rewards along the way. Okay, now I have a nifty thought, and this one now we're off of play to win. I'll even erase it, reduce some complexity here. And maybe I won't save that erase so I can get it back later. But okay, so we're referring back now to webinar number, Alchemy number 9, where the end idea, now this slide, oh, whoops, somehow we tried to click on it to show it, but I instead hit it. Let's show it. Okay, let me just erase this part now. And what we were saying at the end is something that I'm now going to use as one of these little insightful ideas. It'll be pretty cool. It'll give us another insight that might be a very powerful aha moment for some people. And it might be an aha moment now, might be an aha moment in a few days or later today or whenever. But I talked about how we can understand the world in terms of what exists are beings, and then you can include God, or you could just say God separately, then beings that are not God, and then consciousness field. And I left God out just in case it's a stumbling block for now for anybody, but however you want to do it. There's beings which are aware of consciousness fields. There's your consciousness fields, and then there's reasons, and everything we think of. The physical world exists in the world of reasons. It's made of reasons. Your mind is composed of reasons, fundamentally. Middle Earth, like I had written on there, like the fictitious world of the Lord of the Rings, that's composed of reasons also. Similar to a little bit of a parallel is like in a computer game world that you see a part of it on your screen, or you see what you see on your screen, right? That's if you're playing a game and in the game you see you see a forest on your screen and you see a representation over the shoulder of your guy that you are with a gun running through the forest. Then the what's on your screen is parallel to your consciousness field, and then there's reasons. And that can make sense in terms of the code, right, for the computer game, that the computer game world is actually made of code. It's not made of leaves, right? You'll see when you're running through the forest on the computer game, and you see that on your screen, you'll see trees, you'll see bad guys, but there's no bad guys except the bad guys are composed of code. The trees are composed of code, right? The leaves that you see on your computer screen are composed of code. Similarly, and I'll delve into this a little bit more, but similarly, the world that you think of as real, that you experience, when you look out and you see what you think of as a real tree, that real tree is in your consciousness field, but there's a reason for it that's real, that's out there, that's external to your consciousness field, but it's a reason. It's nothing, there's no actual tree like you experience it in your consciousness field any more than there's an actual tree inside of the computer, right? It's funny if someone thought that there was an actual tree. If you imagine going to like a primitive tribe and showing them your laptop and showing them a computer game, or like if, Pokemon Go, if someone thought there was a real Pokemon outside in the train station, right, or in the retail store, but there isn't, right? The Pokemon only exist in the cloud or in the code of your iPhone, right, in the app. And it would be funny, or however you think it. You might not laugh at the person condescendingly, but it would, in a sense, be funny if someone thought there was a real Pokemon sitting in the train station or the park or the retail store or wherever. Or if you went to a primitive tribe or whatever, and they were trying to look inside your computer for the forest, right, or the tree that you see on the computer screen. But then in real life, the advantage that you're going to have as we develop this is massive, because in real life, people really do that. People really think there's a tree out there somewhere, and they're looking for it. Or and then when people deal with others, they're, relatively speaking, very ineffective in dealing with other people at times. They can be effective in getting what they want in the moment, but there's a way that people have an issue with long-term relationships where they'll do things that give them dings and kind of screw things up in terms of long-term relationships that end up being kind of a chain of reasoning from having it wrong that you won't have to do anymore. So literally the way people normally are, right, most everyone you know, they're looking at the world much like the guy who's looking for the tree in the computer game, or much like they think there's really Pokemons out there, like really in the world, really in the park or the train station. Now, and then here's the cool, insightful thought based on that. Now, if we, to the extent that we're able to get this already, to the extent that you're able to look around and experience the world and realize, okay, I'm experiencing my consciousness field. It's not in my head or not. It's not about that, right? Your consciousness field is neither inside or outside, right? It's your whole experience, the experience that feels like it's inside your head, your thoughts, your feelings. The experience that feels like it's external. It's neither inside of you nor outside of you. It's just everything you're aware of, right? The tree that you experience is in your consciousness field. The reason for why you see a tree rather than something else is outside of your consciousness field. A representation of the reason, or a sense of the reason, a feeling of why you see a tree, can be in your consciousness field. Like when you think of the reason why you see a tree, and you're aware of that thought, whatever that thought might be. That thought might not be correct about you might not have the correct reason, but you still can be aware of what you think of as a reason, or the reason why you buy Coke instead of Pepsi, right? Whatever that reason is kind of odd, because when people do a blind taste test, they prefer Pepsi, but when people see the label, they prefer Coke. And I myself do the same thing. I buy Coke and not Pepsi to the extent that I buy it. I haven't drank soda much, but still. So if I think of the reason why I buy Coke, and I think, well, because I like it better or it tastes better, as I'm aware of what I would call the reason, but whatever I'm aware of regarding that reason, the words, the meaning of those words that I'm aware of, that's my consciousness field. But the reason itself, and the chain of reasons why I had that thought and so forth, that is, and even saying the reason itself is wording that's clumsy, but kind of all wording is clumsy because our wording is based on the incorrect view of the world, where there's like a world out there that exists much like there's a Pokemon out there or a forest inside of your computer motherboard, right? There's only what's metaphorical to code out there in the world of reasons. And part of why I scheduled a bunch of time for alchemy is that getting that distinction is in one sense the whole enchilada, right? There's all sorts of details and things we can discuss that will be very helpful after that. But as you digest that, as it makes more and more sense, as your worldview shifts that way, where you see things correctly, and that is correct. What I'm saying must be true. And I realize I'm just asserting that at this point, but you also have a sense of it to some degree. When I make an assertion, I'm more giving you like a roadmap, like a guideline on where we're going. I'm not just telling you you know it because I say it emotionally to you, of course. But we need to have some idea of where I'm going. So as you get that, as you're able to distinguish your experience, your conscious field from all the reasons for it, and then understand what you previously thought of as the physical world and what you previously thought of as your mind or the mental world, and so forth, as the world of reasons, then you can understand that you can't push or control directly the world of reasons. You're not aware of it. You're only aware of your consciousness field. But the reason why your conscious field is the way that it is and not some other way is the world of reasons. So you don't operate directly on your conscious field. You're aware of it, but your conscious field is the way it is because of the world of reasons, which you're not directly aware of. So you're directly aware of one thing, but the reasons for it you're not directly aware of. You can't directly touch the world of reasons. You don't directly experience the world of reasons. You're not directly aware of the world of reasons. So you can't push it or control it. As you get that in a deep and thorough and foundational way, then you'll forever be able to stop. Currently, people spend, without realizing it, spend so much of their resources, I kind of said their resource in an intentional way because, like, their focus, their conscious focus on whether to push and try to just control, whether to kind of get frustrated or angry or just demand or feel entitled or whatever it might be. And when we're talking to someone, there's resource. It's not just your conscious focus. Your brain, actually, there's another major thing which is also limited, which is like your brain's creative focus. Like your brain has only so much processing. And generally that processing is very, or at least to a significant degree, conflicted and operating and trying to achieve multiple goals at the same time. It's not just processing. It's that if you're trying to meet somebody to be a client or a romantic partner or even a friend, and you're trying not to be rejected, then your brain's trying to work on two conflicting goals at the same time, right? So there's a limitation there. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is people are constantly conflicted. And one of the major things they're conflicted about boils down to trying to control their mind, trying to control the situation. And I know I'm using that word a little bit vaguely as a bit of a placeholder that we want to seek to understand. While you're listening to alchemy, you may be conflicted at times with this idea of that you want to feel like you got it. That feeling like you got it is an example of what I mean by control in general. That you're going to want a certain level of organization and structure from it. You're going to want to know where we're going with things. And now, it's tough because that language, like wanting to know where we're going, can mean one of two things. It can mean that you're going for control if it feels like you're kind of pushing to get it, like, come on, I just want to get to that. Or it can be correct in that you're just realizing the fruit you want to get to, and you're patiently building or listening to figure out where I'm going with something. Do you see? So it's almost like you can't even tell directly. It's like you tell sort of by the say the fruit, or almost by your physical or mental response. If you feel impatient, you feel like pushing, if your muscles almost like feel like they're tensing or trying to push you're physically somewhere, because your body your mind will kind of use your body as a bit of a metaphor that way, where it'll actually like kind of tense muscles trying to get you forward. If you feel that feeling, like you want to make forward progress faster, but it's like a pushing type of feeling, then that's where it's turning into this incorrect thing about control. You're trying to like push the code. But the more that you shift your understanding of reality fundamentally to realize that the world of reasons is made up of code. And the way that we control, in quotes, or the way that we, but it's not control in the way that I mean, the way that we get what we want into our consciousness field, the way we have more goodness in our consciousness field, in our experience, is via the world of reasons, right? It's but how do we gain the most power to have more good, less bad, make the changes we want, get the results that we want? is by understanding it, right? Like, and it's easy to see in terms of the computer code with a computer. If you want to do better in the game, or if you're programming the code for the game and you want to have a certain result happen, like if you're trying to program something and you want the game to work right and not have bugs, or you want it to do what you're programming it to do, then how are you going to do that? If your muscles are tensing up, that's not going to do anything for you, right? You just need to understand how to code for that result better, right? It's only going to be understanding that's going to get you there. And if you're playing the game, it's the same story. Understanding the code of the game, and you don't have to understand like the zeros and ones of the game, right? Or C++, whatever the heck they code it. I have no idea these days. You don't need to understand that aspect of it, but you can, if you understand kind of the details and the rules of the game, then that's you're in essence understanding the code in to a large degree, right? In the way that matters to you, and that can be totally sufficient. Now, if you could understand the actual binary code, or it might not be binary, but it might be in a computer language of coding, and you could read that code, then you could even go directly there and you could understand how certain things are calculated in the game that you might never figure out otherwise, if you could do that. But maybe if you can't do that, or if there's no way, if it's locked in some way, then you would use processes like science, right, so to speak, that do your best to approximate it. But you're still trying to understand the code, and you're narrowing down things, and you're getting data and so forth. But there's a way that I got this. Now I'm testifying, and why do I testify? I testify as another angle to help you, right? Testimony is useful as testimony. It doesn't mean you know it because I say it. It doesn't mean I'm great because I had a success. It just gives you another angle on things that can be helpful if you understand it that way. So I can testify that at some point, I feel like it was to some degree gradual. Maybe it kind of hit me all at once. It's hard to remember. But at this point, I see the world in this way. It's so integral to my model of the world that I don't really, and my mind also, doesn't really invest on whether to try to control and push if I'm not getting a result I want with somebody else or with my own mind. If I'm preparing for a webinar and the structure isn't just coming out of my mind, then I don't really respond by trying to push or control. And what will happen is people will feel ashamed or guilty or frustrated, right? These are all outgrowths of this view of trying to control, right? It'll manifest itself in these sort of negative emotions: anger, frustration, guilt, shame, different things. I could write, and it's surprisingly easy to do. As I say it, it might seem obvious not to feel ashamed, but it's pretty easy if I'm trying to plan for a webinar and the structure just isn't coming to me. I have a lot of thoughts, I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm just not sure how to structure it. And the webinar is coming up in the next day, the next morning, or a couple of hours, right? I experience that, but what I do, I experience that pretty much every time, or most times. And it depends on the topic. Now, I've also plenty of times experienced in my life where things can be structured, but with stuff like this, I don't know the magic formula yet for explaining these ideas in a way that also feels like satisfying each webinar, right, and so forth. Although you guys couldn't be better. You guys are awesome in terms of your attitude towards this, so it makes it much easier. Anyway, I'll experience that, but I don't experience a sense of shame, and to the extent that I might experience any kind of frustration or tension, then I understand, wait a second, but I really mostly don't. I mostly understand that I'm trying to, the answer is to try to understand. And understanding can be performed in different ways. It's not exactly like an action that is visibly different than control, but and it's the kind of thing, again, we want to explore. Like first with concepts, we're going to, another example of this control thing, and this is almost turning into a webinar in and of itself, this understanding control, which is fine, I allowed for this. But first we just get like an inkling of it. We get a sort of sense of this distinction between understanding and control, and starting to see that there's a difference there. Right? There's a difference between trying to understand another person, where they're coming from, what their motivation might be, what their blocks might be, in a way where you're patient and calm and just trying to build in that way, versus just feeling frustrated and just feeling like, if I can just yell at this person, I just want to get this result and I want to get it quickly. Right? There's a distinction there. There's a distinction when you're trying to play a video game in feeling frustrated and ashamed and like you just want to get the result that you want now, versus you're just patiently and properly building and performing actions, reading, learning, but also trying things and doing in order to build your understanding in a way that doesn't feel like you're tense in the wrong way. You can feel a creative tension to want to understand, but not where you're pushing in a kind of negative sense. And we can see also the clear difference in effectiveness in both of those, right? It's not just that you feel better, but you snowball differently. You might get a faster result going for control. I could, if I just, another aspect of it, if I just wanted to make a webinar where you guys felt really pumped up afterwards and like really satisfied, then that would be fairly easy. What is difficult is accomplishing that, and basically I make it, it sometimes might be impossible given my current level of understanding. When I say difficult means it doesn't happen. Like basically, well, let me complete one sentence before I go to the next one. What can be difficult, and then I'll clarify what I mean by difficult. What can be difficult is trying to accomplish that, a feeling like you achieved a sense of control, right? If your understanding is sort of wrong in that way, a feeling of triumph and closure, and I got it, while simultaneously making sure that you got the correct information. And when I say difficult, what that means is that if I have a question, how do I do that? Then nothing springs to mind, let's say. And then I start to build, and I build, and it might be a couple of hours or a few days of several hours, and it didn't yet fill itself in how to accomplish both those things at the same time. How to deliver a webinar where there's a sense of fist pumping and triumph and, yeah, I can't wait for the next one, while at the same time giving you correct information. And one of the reasons that is this topic, I'll just refer to another kind of big idea, which is that what people's minds want originally and by default is for things to fit. Fitting well, actually this relates a lot, because your mind gets a sense of control, but it's actually the opposite of understanding. Your mind twists the idea of understanding by default. And it doesn't need to keep doing this once you understand and change it, but it twists the idea of understanding to mean fitting into its current model and the current categories that it has. It doesn't really generally, it's a very strange thing. You'll get a rush from making a distinction and creating a new category, and yet your mind doesn't want to do it at first. And weirdly enough, that's realistic, because as a parallel thing to point out, haven't there been times when you do like niggling tasks that were eating at you, but then you went and did it, or you went and approached a person and talked to them when you felt like you really didn't want to, but then you got a rush from the experience afterwards? Even if you didn't get the result, you broke through some fear, you realized, hey, I can do this again, it wasn't that bad, they didn't like shoot me, right? They didn't even give me a horribly disapproving look, they just talked to me, right? And even if they didn't like say yes and sign on a check that minute, or jump into bed with me, it still was a positive experience. I learned something, and so forth. But you felt like you really didn't want to do it, and yet you did it, and it worked, and then you got a positive rush after it, right? So it's actually realistic for that to happen. And it's kind of weird, right? That's actually one of the puzzles in life, is what the hell's going on with our mind, where it's actually fairly common, or maybe even very common, for things that would give us a positive rush after we do them, plus actually help our lives. And yet we really felt like we didn't want to do them prior to doing it. Well, making distinctions, getting outside the box conceptually, and making new categories, right? And whenever you make a distinction, it's like a new category, and then you make a new word or a new phrase to label that category. Well, your mind really doesn't want to do it. It really resists doing it. It really wants to fit new things that are being said into its existing model and its existing categories. And yet, when it's forced to create a new category, which I'm doing too a lot, right, in Alchemy, then you get a rush afterwards. So it's just a bizarre thing. And the more that the more, just like approaching people, the more you approach people and have it work out okay. And even sometimes if you get disapproving looks, but you realize it's just a certain percentage of people, and that overall you'll get some disapproving looks, but then you'll just connect with people and it'll lead to all sorts of good things. And then you realize that as a whole thing, you'd rather have that, right? Similarly, seeking understanding, you'll get the kind of a little bit of the equivalent of a disapproving look, or at least that you can't go forward sometimes when otherwise other people can, and they're like going forward when you're not. But overall, it's so rewarding that it really becomes a no-brainer, almost literally, where your brain doesn't fight you anymore doing it. And another thing I'm doing with you in this Alchemy series is I'm just getting around you, doing it with you for so long, right? So much time that it kind of gives you that energy or helps you or rubs off, so to speak, in that way. All of Alchemy won't rub off all by itself, just like OMG doesn't rub off all on its own in the sense that you need to go out and do stuff. But there's a way that you're so surrounded by the energy of the amazing coaches that it really helps, right? That you're just surrounded by it. And I'm trying to do the same thing with Alchemy, with these ideas. This foundation for you is I'm just trying to provide so much of my type of energy, which can be different than the type of energy of just going out and making contacts and doing SEO. But in this is something I have energy for, and of course just by getting around me and obviously listening to replays and so forth too, but getting on live for the live experience, all of it, that I'm helping with that. And then you get on the other side of it where it becomes, it just feels right instead of feeling difficult, much like as you approach people enough, then it just feels right and easy rather than not. So when I said, I was talking about it also, the idea of difficulty, and so it's difficult in the sense, like sometimes to make a webinar that's structured in the sense that, or that kind of fulfills both, where people feel satisfied, like they got some answers, they got some structure, while breaking you out of the box, when it's not that I want to break you out of a box, it's just that some of the correct answers are outside of the box, right? And so I'm looking to give you a set of correct answers that are also necessary, right? Things like goals, mind, foundations in general, understanding and control, understanding this distinction about the world of reasons and conscious field, that's just necessary for everyone to understand, right? If you don't understand it, you're just locked out of so much in life that you could otherwise have or accomplish. There's different issues that people have written to me about that they're dealing with in their lives, and it's really helpful for me to see because it helps me to get out of more than just like examples of creating a certain amount of income or romantic relationship or politics or something, and some really important things that people deal with that I wouldn't have guessed, right? Like in some cases it can be abuse at a young age, and then it leads to like or just being treated badly even as an adult or young adult by members of the opposite sex or by authority figures, and then it leads to kind of a sense of difficulty with maybe just trying to do OMG in general. By the way, actually I had this on a next slide. That makes me think of one way that we've mostly all been abused, that we often don't recognize. Sometimes we do, but I don't think I think in general people don't realize nearly the extent that we've had this sense of authority imposed on us. I've actually mentioned these enough that let me go here. Let me just go to the slide. And the student mindset versus entrepreneurial mindset, it relates to what I just kind of built to here. could say meandered to, but built to sounds so much more intentional, right, and better. And stumbled over onto, but anyway, the evidence is I have the slide already, so I must have meant to get to it on some level. So another one of the, I was saying that people wrote in with various things that they were struggling with. Another one is like, and just in case you relate to it, and as like separate from the one I'm about to get to, but is like a sense of guilt and shame from some family members, right? It was one of the things that I really got a benefit from my wife is that she was wonderful with this, where she doesn't have the attitude like work just feels like it should be a priority to her. And of course, I honor that in return by making sure we spend a certain amount of time. And of course, I want to. I mean, I want to be married and have a romantic relationship with my wife and spend time in that. But there's a way that she was great with me prioritizing that. Although actually, even with my own parents, when they would visit, sometimes I would hear from my mom like, "Oh, why do you have to work so much?" Even and it's tough. Sharing personal stuff is tough always because it relates to actual real people. So I have terrific parents who just they did all sorts of great things to get me to where I'm at. And obviously having kids in the first place is a huge sacrifice, but just to the extent that I can identify with it. And by the way, out of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, one of the very useful things I got is that statement. He presented as from women, and I experienced that in general that this is a way that women communicate. But of course, anytime we stereotype, it should only be to sort of open our eyes to potential distinctions, not to put everyone in the same box. Obviously, there's plenty of exceptions, but there's a way that like, why do you have to work so much? Or it is like we never go out just means I want to go out tonight. It just means I want to talk to you right now for a little while. It doesn't mean that you actually work too much or that sort of thing. Anyhow, people can be aware of that. It's if you just aren't told that directly as a guy or as a person in general, that sometimes people communicate that way. That when they'll say, "Why do you never do this?" or "Why do you always do this?" It just means that moment they want to do an activity. It doesn't mean that they, upon reflection, actually mean that in the extreme. Anyhow, just a sense of guilt and shame from family for striving to take your life to the next level with your career. Because, again, realistically, in taking your career to the next level, you are going to have to be, for a time, prioritizing it. And it's understandable that can be difficult, right? I wouldn't necessarily want my wife to, out of the blue, just prioritize career. Right? I wouldn't prevent her. I would be supportive, but I can understand not necessarily wanting that. And the key to that, there's various keys, but one key to that is quarantining it, as always. Like you want to say, there's a push that I want to make right now. One of the things that's very a distinction that makes things so much easier for people to take is when they feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, when they feel like, again, it's not. Usually when people are feeling scared or frustrated, their mind is getting stuck, they feel like something's permanent. It's the minute something doesn't feel permanent, our mind reacts to it very differently. And so communicating that it's not permanent, and I did this years ago, also when I was building, not OMG, but getting my career, kind of my online sort of consulting or building a business career with Mike off the ground, and there would be like a lot of problems I'd be solving constantly. And they'd be on my mind, and they'd feel important. And they were important relative to the fact that I was trying to get my career off the ground that way, or kind of this new career. I had my accelerated learning teaching career, but it was kind of limited, so I was looking to get this working. But I would say, she wouldn't even demand it, but I would say, because like I would pick her up from work, let's say, and she would be talking about just like what was going on in the lives of her coworkers, and I just couldn't pay attention. Like I couldn't get my mind on it because it would be working on problems that felt really big and important. But I recognized that didn't mean one of the things that I'm helping you in with Alchemy is having a different sense of reality, where a lot of things that aren't foundational, that are kind of arbitrary, seem too real, too foundational when they're not. And so things can have a certain level of reality but not be real more than they are. And so I understood that the problems felt real and important to my mind, but they were real and important enough that I wasn't going to be able to get my mind off them in the next 5 minutes or that night. And then I didn't even necessarily want to get my mind off. If I did what it took to get my mind off it, I would be having to deprioritize my career for a little while in a way that was going to have negative side effects for the career part. There wasn't a way for me to really get my mind off the problems for that amount of time. And I would say, like, I can't really give this the attention right now. I'm not really going to be able to process this. But I don't like want to live our whole lives this way or anything. It's just like while I'm kind of wrapped up in this, and just today, and sometimes it pops up where I just have a particularly consuming problem that's on my mind. So the quarantining can help there. And in general, negative emotions often come from an artificial feeling of permanence. And if you alleviate the feeling of permanence, or feelings, your mind can get stuck. It's almost like it's not that it's permanent in the sense that it's an unlimited amount of time. It's almost like in a lot of cases things are permanent in the sense that the sense of time is stuck, where it's like all the time is now, or whatever's going on right now is sort of all that exists. A little bit like if you're afraid to go to the dentist, that it's not like your mind actually thinks you're going to be at the dentist in pain forever, but there's a sort of permanence, more of like getting stuck in time, where your mind kind of imagines going to the dentist and it just stops right there, right? Or in the case of not being able to pay attention to my wife talking about day-to-day stuff. And day-to-day stuff is not, like, it's not unimportant in and of itself, right? As a matter of fact, that's how you know and relate to people generally, is with day-to-day stuff. But it didn't have to be permanent, right? With that either. But I didn't want her thinking that it was going to be forever, right? It was just in that moment. And neither did I want my own mind thinking that my problems that I was going to be working on were going to be permanent, right? Or that the fact that I was going to have to keep on solving these problems and having my mind racing about them was going to be permanent. Okay, so in your notes you can make a note of that about the permanence. I've referred to that other times, but this is a time that helped me to give another angle and reinforce that very, very important concept. Okay, so and everything I'm talking about now, it's still very related and transitional towards this phase 2. So it's all intentional. Even though I admittedly don't know the perfect step-by-step set of words or topics or slides that would take us right through phase 2 most perfectly. I don't know. But I have a good sense overall of what we need to do and get to, and we'll just do it this way. That's the best that my understanding can build at this point. Okay. So I mentioned people writing to me. I mentioned the various things that we're looking to deal with. Oh, and this relates to our core. Another thing that's going on right now is that we're doing 2 things in parallel that are going to help each other. We're going to be looking to dissolve some parts of what's like at a core of our sense of self, things like fairness or things that lead to feelings of guilt or shame or frustration, right? If we're feeling those things sometimes, or fear or whatever, then those are coming from our core. Even the sense of like whether to play to win, right? Or whether to control versus understand. That's all coming from our core. So if that's happening, if these incorrect things are coming from our core, those are some things we have to dissolve. So we're going to dissolve like our core understanding of ourself, or our core self is composed of ideas. It's actually composed of standards and norms, what feels like it should be. Okay, so this sense of fundamentally how the world should be. Again, including like if you feel frustrated, it must be because from your core there's a norm, there's a standard that you should feel frustrated in a situation like this, right? So it relates to these standards and norms. Some of those or several of those we want to actually dissolve, or it's a cluster and we want to dissolve part of the cluster. We want to get it elemental, right? To break it into elements and realize part of those elements are incorrect. And some of them are correct. And so we want to construct our core of the right elements and remove some of the wrong ones that are incorrect, contradictory ideas that are causing these things. So we're getting at our core, rebuilding it, and what that's going to do, and it's fairly obvious that'll be helpful, I think, at this point, but ultimately we need to simplify our lives. It might look like I'm complicating your lives with alchemy in a sense, but when you break things down into their elements and rebuild them back up, that actually greatly simplifies your life, right? Because now if your core is composed of elements that are correct that you've intentionally put in there, then it's way simpler to deal with individual situations because you're not having to correct for all the incorrect stuff that comes from the incorrect elements that were there previously. The simplest way to convert, for example, like to do a sales presentation, is not to memorize a bazillion details. Of course, you can have slides and have details that are practiced, but ultimately, coming from a core place of confidence in your offer, and in that you kind of want to buy your own offer, right? Not that you want to make the sale, because if you want to make the sale, that's a different. You're not coming from the same place as your potential customer. You want to be in a buy. You want to feel like you want to buy your offer, right? So coming from that place is the easiest, is the simplest thing to do when you're trying to make a sale. If you're just in the buying place where you have understanding and therefore confidence and want to buy your offer, and if you understand your offer and you don't want it, then that means you need to work on your offer, not your sales presentation, right? So when you're coming from a place of understanding your offer, and out of that understanding you want to buy it yourself, in essence, then it's going to be pretty easy to sell, and you don't need almost any other hints. But it's going to be also easy to see things, details that are correct. Details that are correct at that point that you learn from different books about sales will naturally just sort of get absorbed easily, and you'll absorb them into your presentation. But if you just come from a place, if you have a core or whatever, come from the right, you're standing in the right place, then life is generally simple. If you're standing in the right place regarding your business relationships and your joint ventures, or regarding a consulting relationship where you have a client and you're the guy that they're paying, or the woman that you're paying. When you're coming from a core, you don't have to always be thinking of what to say. When relationships have the wrong foundation, that's when people are on the phone ad nauseum with their friends trying to think, what do I do? This person said this, right? The person you're in a relationship, they said this, what do I do? Or my client told me this, what do I do? Right? If you're standing in the right place, then it tends to be more natural to think of the right thing to do. However, it's still totally reasonable to be reading books or to asking advice. But you can get a sense of whether the advice is correct or not. You might not have thought of something, and then someone else helped you to think of it. That'll happen a lot, right? There's a bazillion things I don't think of in life, but because I have the core, then it becomes much more easy to distinguish whether something's correct or not. So what we're doing now in phase 2 is we're going to use this building of the core. And right now, what's on the slide relates to core things, relates to dissolving and looking at elements of our core. And then we're going to relate that to the method of how to understand. And a subset of how to understand is how to know what's true. But generally, we want to understand the idea of understanding. And we're relating it to our core. And then given that, if you were to replay this webinar or what we've talked about so far, everything I've said relates to those two things. The nature of understanding, for example, comparing it to control, and filling that in more and more. And when I talk about understanding versus control here, I'll flip back for a second. Again, it's the wrong type of control to feel like you already should have filled everything in regarding the meaning of what I mean by understanding and what I mean by control. Totally cool to ask what I mean by control, what I mean by understanding. But when the nature of asking a question should be that it's like that fruit that you want to grow, and then you relax and you identify what you're looking to get, right? More of the elements of what is meant by understanding versus what is meant by control. And then you keep building and distinguishing those elements, and that can mean zooming in and on clusters and so forth. And we'll just keep on doing that, and that's how we answer the question, well, David, what is understanding? What is control? You start with a distinction. You start with a starting distinction of seeing a kind of extreme of control versus understanding, right? If someone's just yelling at someone else in a conversation, or that they're in a joint venture with and frustrated and just trying to get them to do a particular thing the way they want, then that's an example of control. If you're going to pieces right now, feeling like I should have already given you a full understanding of everything I've been talking about, right? That's an extreme example of control, versus understanding where someone's patiently has just a glimmer, just a foothold of what they are going for, and then they start to build to try to understand better until it all fills itself in. That's going for the understanding. Or if we imagine a coder who's making a video game, they're not just yelling at the computer trying to yell at it to have the code work properly. That's an extreme example of control, versus if they're just patiently building more understanding of what they're trying to code for, what the result they're trying to get, and then how to code for that result. That more indicates understanding. And then about this concept itself, we're building our understanding piece by piece. And sometimes that doesn't involve just adding pieces. Sometimes it involves coming to a cluster of ideas, like even when I talk about the idea of mind, right? Or authority, when I talked about authority. Authority is an idea cluster at first, or like a vague, or it's a foothold, whatever. But then we start to look at, well, what are the elements of what I mean, what authority is, or what I mean by it, or different things that authority could mean. And when we start to break things up into elements, we actually have less sense of control, right? If we just assume what we mean, that we know what we mean by the word authority, then that gives us more of a sense of control, because now we can now we have like a piece we can use. When we're breaking it apart, we almost feel like we have less. But when we're looking for understanding, we feel like we have more. In life, always you want to be seeking understanding. Never do you want to be going for things regarding this control idea. The more you get that, the more, like, what people do is they spend a lot of time wondering, like, kind of feeling like they should go for maybe control rather than understanding. All the time spent like trying to, on that feeling of whether to go for control, that's all wasted. And then to whatever degree people decide to actually go for control, then that's a waste. That's actually negative, basically negative progress. And when you do neither of those things and just only go for understanding all the time, and you can picture this in terms of a relationship that you have, like a joint venture, where if you want someone to do something, then first of all, you're understanding the nature of what it is you want them to do, including maybe you actually don't want them to do that whole thing. Maybe you can do some of it, maybe someone else can do some of it, or maybe some of it doesn't have to get done. Okay? So you understand the nature of what you want them to do, supposedly, and then you understand the nature of your own mind, and then you understand the nature of their mind and what they're motivated to do, what they understand, what they don't understand, what things they could do that might build their understanding, all that stuff. When that's how you deal with people, then that's the correct way. When you just feel jumpy towards a person and towards getting a result that you don't, it's in and of itself, you don't understand necessarily that well, but you just presume you do understand it, and you do think you do want to do that task, that whole cluster of a task, then that's like the control thing. And the more time you spend doing that, and the more time you spend feeling like you should do it, and maybe you should do it, that's all either a waste or counterproductive. You remove all that and just do what's productive, and it's incredible, the snowballing you can have with relationships. And that's a description of why in actual real life and practice, the relationships that I have just snowball. And it's why I had snowballed with my wife, let's say, and that's why I was able to prioritize work for a while, right? Because undergirding that was a very solid relationship, not just in theory, but in practice, including plenty of romance and so forth. Not just like in theory that we had a commitment, right? But lots of good feelings, lots of understanding, and maybe I couldn't pay attention very well to her talking about her colleagues, which again is a very valid thing to do. Just talking about life is a great way to relate to people. It's not unimportant inherently, but if I couldn't listen to that, I can give someone a foot rub still, right? And then I could be thinking about my issues in my head and giving someone a massage. And so you do that instead if you need to. How do you figure that out? Right, understanding more. having more understanding of the elements of things. Okay, so I'll go for this slide hit thing, and then then we can just do a little bit of our discussion together, and that'll be that. But I think I'll wrap up the sort of monologue portion with what's on this slide here. All right, so the student mindset, roughly speaking, is the bad part of this distinction, and then the entrepreneurial mindset is the basically good thing that I mean. There's certainly ways to interpret a student mindset that are good things. And so I don't mean those things in this. Anyway, I'm more talking about like the authority, being told what to do type of mindset. And I also mean here the sense of closure and getting alchemy. So we have probably spent a lot of our lives, a lot of the formative years of our lives, where there's this whole chain of events or reasoning and reasons and so forth. That bird's kind of loud. Let me close this door. All right. Sorry. Hopefully that wasn't too loud all along. No. Anyhow, let's see here. We don't have goals for the past. However loud the bird was, it was. All right. So the chain of what was going on with the authority is it was implied to you that being smart is when you already have the answer, right? If a teacher calls on you and you have the right answer, then you get an approving look, right? You get whatever reward. If when you take a test, then you're tested on whether you already have the right answer. You're not tested on process or seeking understanding. Someone can make the argument that the test based on how well you sought understanding prior to the test. But regardless, even that really wasn't the case, because the test is given at a certain point in time, and at that point you're testing on the right answer. The right answer is defined by what the teacher says is correct. Now, what the teacher is saying is correct might be correct, but fundamentally the right answer, one way or the other, regardless of how correct the teacher is what the authority figure says is right. And more importantly, there's an implication that what's important, what's going to be on the test, is what the authority figure says. And the result is fully given and defined by the authority figure. So there's the fundamental basis of reality is the authority figure. There's no market, there's no result outside of the grade you get on the test. Right? It may be somewhat objective by, if there's math questions or something, those questions may or may not be objectively correct. But regardless, whether you are right, whether the final result, the final foundation is rooted in the authority figure saying yes or no, that how you did on the test. And if you do well on the test, there's no next thing, essentially, unless there's another test at the end of the semester, but it's just going to be another test, right? Or maybe you get accepted, but then you're being accepted by an acceptance person, what amounts to an authority figure, even if they're like on the committee of admissions. But it's all the whole reality is based kind of on nothing, or it terminates with these people and their opinions, or at least their opinions of what's important. And again, even if the test is objectively right, then as long as you just give right, there's these right answers that you can learn, and then you just put them on the test, and there you go. And so even though the answers might be objective, the test questions are subjective. They're just determined by authority figures. In the entrepreneurial mindset, in real life, and with alchemy, of course I could structure alchemy so I just give you a test at the end, in which case I could easily structure the whole program. And it could all be very satisfying, right? You go through the program, you learn what I say is important, and then it's all self-defined. I give you a test, and if you do well on the test at the end, you're an alchemy superstar, right? But the problem is that there's a real life out there. And of course, I'm trying to give you an advantage in real life. And we see the same thing with being an entrepreneur in general. The reason it can be so difficult, and the reason why, even when someone's taking a course like the OMG coaching, whether learning to be an SEO consultant or doing something else, building an affiliate-based website or doing a few things, CPA website, cost per action, whether collecting leads, whatever it might be, or just doing your own products or doing something with Amazon with e-commerce. There's still a sense that people don't even realize it's been so ingrained that it just feels so real that, and this is, again, relates to your core, and we're taking a look at this now together, is that the ultimate goal ends up to be like feeling like you're smart. And with the set, well, you get this kind of vague sense that doing well on a test is going to give you rewards later in life, right? It's all going to do something. So, but it really ends at the test, but there's a feeling like there's that kind of frozen in time sense of permanence. A little bit like if a parent says to a child, you do this or else, right? The or else is left kind of vague, so you get this kind of sense of permanence from it, the sense of kind of ultimateness from it. If you try to pin down what doing well on the test does for you, it can be difficult. Now, I was pre-med for a while, and it all kind of made sense. Now, ultimately, you can come to realize that it's actually fully defined by government at a certain point instead. To the extent that school does lead to a real result in terms of income, it's mostly undergirded or upheld by government. Like so with the pre-med. And I'm not at all meandering into politics here. I'm just giving a quick showing you how it all terminates with the student mindset. But with pre-med, you really do need to get like a 3.7 or 3.6, or depending on which school you're in, how hard the school is. But somewhere in that neighborhood where you basically have to average an A-, which means if you get a B+, it's like the end of the world because you have to get 2 A's. You have to get like all A-s and 2 actual A's versus A-, which is incredibly harder than an A- to get an A, like way harder, in like the school I went to at least. So even a B+ is like a horrific thing. Anyhow, you then if you do well enough also on another test, the MCATs, then you can get into med school. Once you're in med school, you're pretty much set because the government pretty much takes over from there. And the school and just ensures you a career, right? And it all comes down to licensing, right? And so licensing is just another form of authoritative checkmark. And so the real world of careers is filled with things that actually do terminate with authority, right? A lot of jobs out there are that you're in a corporation that's basically upheld by government regulations and so forth. And some of them are upheld by reality and market forces and so forth, but the job itself has to do with performing well enough that an authority figure allows you to keep that job, right? So you really can go through your whole life that way, where you're just pleasing authority figures, and that's the entire result that you need to get. I had, what's in one sense of a handicap, was I just couldn't bring myself to do it, like in essence. I held it together pretty well. Like I did, well enough to get into a good school, and then I had good grades for the first 2 years until I got the entrepreneurial bug. But anyway, one way or the other, there was a way that anyway, it doesn't really matter about myself. But you can kind of live your whole life just in that authority mindset, and then you can lose. Right, you can get to the point where you die and the world isn't anywhere near perfect, and you weren't part of making it perfect, and that was that. But you can make your own standards and decide that you won, right? Just say, well, I had a nice family and I raised some kids and I did this and that and great. But really, we're not here to just live, have some happiness, have some suffering, and die, and then whatever happens after that happens. So, and certainly to the extent that we are going to be entrepreneurs, and certainly for Alchemy itself, you cannot get it in that authoritarian mindset. But people have that mindset without realizing it to some degree, and not everybody. It doesn't matter whether you do or not. You don't need a goal for the past, right? But what we do want to do is dissolve that mindset. We want to understand it enough that we can fake it when necessary, either to keep our stable base, no problem, right? And when I say fake it, I mean we can appreciate it. Like we can appreciate a job and realize that part of a job is that really what we're paid for is to please the authority figure, right? And when we realize that, then that's actually helpful. I could have done better ultimately if I just realized that and embraced it, and then I don't decide whether I want to do it, or I separately decide whether I want to please the authority figure, like whether I want to get in a situation where the end result is founded in pleasing the authority figure, and then I decide, yeah, right now I need to do that. But pretty much I would always want to work my way out of that, right? And you build your way out of it. You can't just force your way out of it necessarily, right? Now you could just jump off into the great unknown and have no stable base, and that may or may not be right. As far as I can tell, I think it's better to keep a stable base and work your way out of it. Same thing when you're a child, right? You understand, okay, wait, I can't make it on my own right now, one way or the other. Even if I theoretically could, the government won't even let me, right? So not even just my parents, but the world at large will kind of be against me with regulation. And plus, I just probably don't have the skills and the ability to. And even if I had the skills, people just wouldn't believe me, right? And I don't even have a legal right to make contracts and so forth. So if someone's a child, and I know you're not children for the most part listening to this, but it still helps to understand because you deal with children, right? You might have kids of your own. They can understand authority to the extent that, okay, I'm choosing to be in this situation now where my stable base comes from pleasing authority figures. And then it makes sense in and of that reality, just like getting into a movie. You don't want to watch a movie and wonder whether you want to be watching the movie. You get into it, right? If you understand, yeah, I understand I'm in a situation where I need to please authority figures fundamentally. It's not about something deeper than that. I'm stipulating that. That is the deepest thing. But we want to be, the thing about stipulating is we understand we're doing it on purpose. We're not assuming in a way that's invisible to us. And so when we're doing alchemy, we do not want to be in that mindset at all. Alchemy is not about me giving you a check mark or an approval. And it's not about your own mind giving you an approval either. It's not about that feeling of approval. We're doing something different that's entrepreneurial in the sense that we're going for a real result that's determined by more fundamental reality. Just like when you're an entrepreneur, you're right if you make money without violating people's property rights, right? Then you're right. And if you keep the money, like if the government doesn't, or someone doesn't, then sorry, there's a way that what I'm saying is right and wrong at the same time. It's kind of a cluster. Basically, you want to make it in a way that's not obviously violating, even if it's not violating proper rights, if it's not violating a law that you could have predicted, that you could have noticed in advance, that just ends up kicking you in the nuts, so to speak. Then you made money, right? If you made money morally but violating the law, then that's not a very good strategy, right? You might keep it, you might not, but it's kind of out of your control at that point. Life ultimately is out of your control. You can't deal with what if people just attack you immorally, but if it's like predictive, anyhow, it's a little bit in the weeds. But that distinction is somewhat useful. So with being an entrepreneur, if you make money in a way where you're not violating pretty obvious regulations and where you're not doing something where you're violating property rights, then I mentioned to Mike years ago, like if I made money being a drug dealer, then the first thing I would want to pay for is not having my business be something that was illegal, right? Because it's just bad strategy, right? If people are like, I'm going to attack you if you do this. Just like I wouldn't want to cross the mafia, right? So crossing the mafia is neither illegal nor is it immoral, but it's bad strategy, right? So if I was doing a business that treaded upon the mafia territory, and they were like, you're treading on our territory, we're going to come after you if you keep doing that, then strategically, I would probably just want to do a different business, right? Similarly, crossing the government is basically the equivalent of the mafia, literally. And so you don't want to cross it. That's bad strategy. So realistically, as an entrepreneur, you neither want to cross the mafia or anything like it, or the government or anything like it. And you don't want to do things that are immoral, even if they're illegal and don't cross the mafia. You don't want to do things that are defrauding people. I wouldn't want to have a course helping people make money that didn't legitimately help them, right? People might join the course and not make money for a while because they need to do something of their own. That's okay with me. But they need to be given the right tools and foundation, and they need to be sold in the right way where they understand what they're getting and what they're not getting. Anyhow, if you make money doing that, then that's entrepreneurial. It's just now decided by reality. Other than that, right? If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And you don't have to worry about what I mean by reality there. Just a simple meaning of reality is perfectly fine for understanding that statement. There's a foundationalness to it. If people voluntarily give you their own money for a service and they're satisfied, reasonably satisfied afterwards, then and you didn't otherwise cross those other things that I said, the mafia or government, basic morality, then you succeeded entrepreneurially. Let's give you another example. It's a little bit different. When I taught speed reading. If people could actually read faster with the same or better comprehension, then we got the result we were going for. It didn't matter whether they were given a certain grade, right? If I gave them a sticker or an approving look or a test, that's not relevant. What was relevant is that result. So if the result that's decided in advance is the approval of an authority figure, then it's foundational in that way, within that stipulation. If the result is money, then it's foundational within that stipulation is another good way to put it. Someone else might come by and say, well, money isn't everything. Then you can say, it's okay, I'm stipulating it. And you avoid that whole, I was going to say idiocy, or whatever, but it's not necessarily idiocy. Someone could say speed reading isn't everything, right? And I would say, I agree, but we're stipulating in this course that we're looking to be able to read fast. So if we get that result, then it worked. If you're an entrepreneur and if you make money within those boundaries I mentioned, then it worked. With Alchemy, we are seeking to have true understanding, and we don't even necessarily know what that means yet as we're going here, but we'll build that, and we want to get to a point where we have a better. The more we uncover about that, the more progress we're making. And then as we build things that can help us accomplish the results we want, figure out what results we really want in life, what strategic objectives you want to go for, what smaller tactical objectives within that, what things we want to drop and not go for and dissolve, as we dissolve contradictions. With all of that, we're making progress with Alchemy, and let's let go of any kind of artificial results, including a feeling of satisfaction at the end of a webinar, or a feeling like you're checking things off, or that you want to hear from me if you're getting it, or that you're trying to feel smart, right? That's an example of control where your brain, is trying to accomplish all sorts of other things at once that are going to do nothing but interfere. And examining this authority mindset within yourself, within your core, your self-image, or your way of operating. And when I use the word self, I'm not referring to you as a being. I'm referring to there's a sense of self within the world of reasons, right? That's like part of your mind, we could say, or whatever. But it's again like kind of like probably we could say that it's composed of the standards and norms that form these kind of meta goals or super goals about how you should be, how yourself or your avatar, like in the world should be. And within that, probably got some degree of this authority mindset that goes, and it relates to also feeling already smart, feeling like there's a right answer, and feeling like I should be presenting this like an authoritarian teacher, where since I define what goes on the test, then I can, of course, structure the lessons so you can do well on the test. But with alchemy, there's no test. The test is reality, and so since I don't define the test, I can't then define the structure so easily. Sometimes I can figure out the structure, but the structure is like objective, and it's objectively based on your mind, which I don't know directly, right? Because think about it. I'm trying to bridge these ideas to your mind. So I need to objectively understand certain ideas, and I objectively understand a whole bunch of ideas, which is why I launched Alchemy in the first place. But there's other ideas I'd like to know that are related and that would help you get it that I don't know. And given that I don't know them, I can't put them on a slide yet, and I can't structure them in webinars yet. So in order for me to succeed in the ideal way with alchemy, I need to know things about reality, some of which I do know, which is good, some of which I don't. And then I would need to understand things about your own mind, some of which I do know because they're common to other minds and I can deduce them. And I can also infer. And when I infer, I might guess right. Infer means I see it in lots of other people, so I suppose that your mind is the same way, right? That I don't know for sure, but it's a reasonable way to guess in the absence of knowing for certain. But I would need to know your mind perfectly and understand reality perfectly in order to make alchemy perfect in that sense and structure it in that sense. The reason why other teachers often can do what that type of thing is because they get to define the test at the end. They define the result. But alchemy is not, the result of alchemy is not defined by me. It's defined by objective reality. And that's why I can only do what I can do. Which I totally am getting amazing feedback from you guys that it's sufficient in the sense of you don't feel like I'm letting you down or that I'm like half-assing it, or whatever. But that will further help you to understand what not to expect from me because it's not realistic, given the objective nature of what we're doing. And it's probably pretty exciting. And this understanding, just to summarize, kind of something I covered, but just as a kind of a wrap-up, one really triumphant, exciting thing that you can get to is something can click, even in the absence of you don't need to fully understand what I mean, and I don't even know what I mean fully yet. There's an objective reality to understanding versus control that I only have parts of at this point. And those parts are pretty awesome, and I try to share those with you. But the distinction, right, just kind of seeing that distinction, and you can see the distinctions. You can see distinctions without seeing everything or having full understanding. Literally, in a sense, you see distinctions. That statement itself, I don't fully understand, but I think I understand it well enough too. That there's something about it that's very correct. So if you just see the distinction between understanding and control, even kind of at the extremes, and start to see how futile it is, F-U-T-I-L-E, not like feudal medieval times, but how futile it is to go for control in anything in life versus just trying to understand. It's one angle on the whole enchilada. And if you just do that consistently, your efficiency and effectiveness with just being happy and then having effective snowballing relationships, which of course lead to money, right? I mean, if you can have snowballing relationships, that people are attracted to you and want to like work with you and want to be look how it all relates. I mean, the more your romantic partner or a potential romantic partner wants to be in a romantic relationship with you, the less they're going to give you grief, right? And so the more you get this understanding versus control distinction, the more people are going to want to be in any sort of relationship with you, for good reason, because it'll be better, right? You'll be a great person to be in a relationship with. Plus, you'll understand them better because you'll be seeking understanding. So that'll snowball there. They'll snowball in so many ways. You'll understand them better, so you'll actually operate in a way where they'll enjoy being in a relationship with you even more. Plus, you'll get results better for yourself that'll affect them. You'll help them get results better, so even more they'll want to be in a relationship with you. you'll set them up to get better results. They'll like that. They'll feel better about themselves. They'll want to be more in a relationship with you. Even if that's just a romance and not a business relationship, then because there's so many reasons why they want to be in a relationship with you, and because you're dissolving reasons why that are friction on the relationship and drag, then and because you just give them more massages, right, in addition to everything else, then unless they just don't like massages, but most people do, then then they'll give you leeway, right? They'll be more willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. And then that's a huge thing. And when you have the benefit of the doubt with somebody, that relationship is astronomically easier, right? You're struggling uphill. It's okay to struggle and have things be difficult, but what I do is I invest my struggle in permanent building blocks, right? In permanently understanding something, building something that I can permanently mix in the future, building a relationship that's going to, on a permanent, or even if I'm not permanently in that relationship with somebody, even if I do a task with a person or a venture with a person that permanently gives me a building block that I can build the next thing, right? That's still permanent. So you struggle, at least you put your struggle in things that are permanent rather than just being on a treadmill, right? And so I don't want to struggle within a relationship day in and day out without having better building blocks in place. I at least want to struggle to get that relationship on firm footing, so that that relationship itself is no longer a struggle, and I could struggle to build the next building block rather than just struggle to to stay where I'm at, or even lose ground, right? So you'll get the benefit of the doubt with that person. Then you won't have to struggle within the relationship. That will free you up to be able to strive in your career, at least temporarily, right? Because that struggle part of your career doesn't have to be permanent. You can struggle for a few years and then get to the point where, like, Cotton really doesn't struggle in this point in his SEO career. He understands SEO deeply, and he has a referral list, and so on and so forth. In so many ways, it just kind of he can maintain it, but it's not really a struggle, and so he can put his creativity into other places, and a lot of those benefit OMGers, right, greatly. And because of my core that I built with understanding and including understanding him, we get to benefit from that, and I am so grateful for that. I use that as just, of course, an example. I have so many people who I work with these days. I'm not going to name them all every time I name one of them, but just he's starting Opus, so it's as an example, and it's just amazing, right? What he comes up with and what he does for people, and then by ripple effect, what I benefit from being able to work with him. And it's just the ripple effects of this type of understanding versus control. So as you internalize that more and more, as it becomes more and more natural to not be struggling regarding whether you're going for control, and then also not be therefore losing the struggle sometimes and just going for control, then you just get all the fruits of going for understanding and snowballing there. And it's just terrific. And so to the extent that this webinar helped that, then that's massive. And then everything else we talked about as well can be helpful. Remember, I talked about playing to win and how that's such a hack. If you're playing to win and you give off that signal, even if it's going to be just for a couple of years, or for one project, or same thing in a romantic relationship, if they see that you're playing to win in that romantic relationship, then it's so much easier to keep the person and then not be nervous, and then they'll play to win, and that'll snowball because now you're playing to win. That signals to them to play to win, so they do so much better. So now you're not disappointed in them to the same degree, if you both have one foot in, one foot out, then you're both going to keep on degenerating, right, with that relationship. It's like you're both playing a game of chicken all the time to see who can do less and who cares least and so forth. All right, excellent. That is good for this webinar. And we could discuss for a little while, and that'll be that. Excuse me. Maybe I'll shoot straight to the end, and then I'll go back up. Massive. Excellent, Jeremy. Thank you. Definitely not let down. I appreciate that, Brian. Loving the whole government is the equivalent of mafia model. Yeah, well, I mean, it actually is literal. It's more of a matter of whether it's like more or less kind of workable. Right? There can be better or worse mafias, basically. To the extent that a mafia keeps out a worse mafia, then it's beneficial. To the extent that it operates as the mafia and takes half your money, then it's not so beneficial. Is play to win equivalent to showing up with 100% commitment? It is a great question. I like that. That's terrific. Okay, so let's see here. 100% commitment, you can only have 100% commitment within boundaries. Okay, so yes, except for make sure that you, if you don't define the boundaries of a particular commitment, of a particular objective that you're playing to win with, like literally part of deciding whether to win, whether to go for a particular win, whether to go for an objective, you pretty much always want to play to win once you decide an objective, right? Even if it's within half an hour, right? But so you pretty much, when you're playing, you want to play to win. Separate from that is deciding what you want to go for, which is equivalent to deciding whether you want to go for one thing versus something else. Equivalent to that, or necessary within deciding what you want to go for, or which is the same as whether you want to go for a particular thing. Inherent within that, logically related to that, necessarily related to that, is the boundaries within which you're going for that objective. And what you don't want to, what you want to do, and now I'm going to say something important here. You want to discover objective boundaries rather than come up with arbitrary boundaries. So that's why you don't want to just make deadlines that are arbitrary in order to supposedly motivate you. That doesn't make any sense. When another person's involved, that's when time matters, when there's another person, when there's two people involved. Literally, in a logical, necessarily sense. I'm not going to get deep into that, but it's just correct. So when there's another person involved, then there's going to be natural, I wouldn't call it a deadline, like someone dies at the end of the line, but there's natural timelines or things, right? And you still want to have less arbitrary nature to it and more like, okay, and you still want to think in terms of bottlenecks. Like if someone's bottlenecked until you accomplish a certain task, then you generally will prioritize that, right? That's how you figure out what you do first, is if someone else is necessarily waiting on you. And if someone's waiting on you when they don't need to be, then you want to recognize that when you're working with someone and say, wait a second, actually, don't you, like, let's look and see why that's an artificial bottleneck. You're artificially waiting on me when you don't need to be. And that's pretty much how I look at time nature of things, is looking whether it has to be a real bottleneck. If we have to, for my business, if we have to do a product launch at a certain time, we need to open it up and we have to close it down, and affiliates are going to promote it at a certain time, so obviously they have to schedule that. The more leeway I can build into that, the better, but at some point you have to schedule it. That's an example of a real boundary. And I'm always looking to have those boundaries be as wide as possible, and then where they're objectively, correct. At some point you have to stipulate. There's no such thing as an objectively perfect time to say I'm going to do a launch that opens this day and closes on that day, where I know perfectly that it should be August 31st is when it closes, right? But at some point you just have to know as much as you can and then pick, and then stipulate, realize it's reasonable, and then not look back unless there's a red flag that pops up where you have to stop and think about it. So there you go. So basically you want to play to win within the boundaries that you create, and you can't play to win without getting the boundaries good. And the better you get the boundaries, the better you can play to win. Playing to win almost happens not during the playing, right? It happens during the structuring of the decision, the planning. Thank you for such a great talk. It is so easy to see how everyone here is having a great time as we are unraveling the gold nuggets within our ever infinite mind. Excellent, Michael. I love that statement. That's terrific. David, are you learning a lot? Absolutely, Neil. And that was part of the plan, is that it was going to help me to understand more of the questions that I was working on. There's something about, remember, we're always trying to our mind is external to us, right? And so it's like we're trying to create conditions in which the mind achieves the results we want. And so first I worked on this for about 3 months without any kind of commitment to or deadline where I was going to necessarily do alchemy. I don't even know if I would do this at all. So I didn't have a pressure. And then at some point of doing that, then you want to have like there's a way, and I don't have this perfectly figured out, but there's a way that this is correct. A little bit like, anyway, I was going to say a little bit like Newtonian physics has to be correct on some level because it just, you understand, like, we're not going to find out that a car, if it smashes into another car, doesn't create an accident, right? Or if you roll a ball downhill, it goes downhill. Anyhow, there's a way that what I'm saying, with the next thing I'm going to say is correct, where there's something about having a rhythm to things that definitely is helpful. So, for example, it's helpful in our business. It was helpful to have launch our 2016 version of our coaching, right, Project Assimilation, and then have it close where we're done marketing it, where it kind of closes that loop on all of our minds. We're not always thinking about what we need to do to market it, and instead we relax that way and then focus in on being creative just in terms of fulfilling it. And then we get to a point where the creative push for fulfilling it got completed pretty well, like Assimilation Light got figured out and correct and implemented. And not all of you are participating in this, but it's okay if you don't know the details. But Joe did his series he was going to do on video mastery. Stephen did his local SEO series. Liz did her A through Z series, plus she did an Amazon Apprentice thing. And these things got completed they got figured out, thought of, implemented, and then we were able to go into a phase that we're sort of in now, where we're building for next year, where we're not marketing, but we're building in a good way, and in a way where part of that is just building the content for the second half of this year. It's coming great. But we're also, and I'm able to shore up various things, even things like terms of service on our website and things like that. I'm able to work on. Potentially, I haven't put a lot of actual time into this, but I'm set up for it, and I'm clearing a space for it where I'm working on the platform, like the membership platform and so forth, and I may get us moved over to that within the next 6 months. I may not, but there's a rhythm to things, and having the rhythm. Sorry, it's easiest to see, just a simple illustration. It's easiest to see in terms of taking a vacation from your life, where you can look forward to the vacation, enjoy the vacation, but then toward the end of the vacation often be looking forward to getting back to your life. Of course, in some cases, you're not looking forward to getting back to your life, which is a good indication where you want to build a different normal life, right? So, and build, not necessarily, again, seek understanding, right? Not control, where you're like, oh, this moment I'm supposed to have a better career, a better life. That's control. But where you say, I want to understand how to have a life that I look forward to getting back to, or a career or something that I look forward to getting back to at the end of my trip. Right? But anyhow, clearly you can imagine a rhythm where you go on vacation and you enjoy the vacation, but then you're looking forward toward the end of it and getting back to things. Or a rhythm during Alchemy, there's a rhythm where I do webinars now, like I'm doing now, and then I have time during the week to develop, right, and to think through things, versus if I just did it all straight, right, one big marathon of a weekend, or a couple weeks, or whatever it would take, where I was talking every day, there'd be less of a rhythm. So rhythms are helpful. And I was talking about playing to win, right? Within boundaries, you can have a rhythm for things. I think I was saying. And I might have been talking about the next thing. Oh, am I learning a lot? Absolutely. So I was talking about, that's where I talk about rhythm, am I learning a lot? And so having that rhythm where there was a time when there was no deadline, no boundary, no commitment. I was committed overall to understanding the stuff that was coming up with it, and for various reasons, right? I want to catalyze a fundamental change in the world, right? Where people can seek understanding, and understanding enough about doing that they're doing it. And then that can lead to dissolving contradictions in the world, and people getting this idea and never going back. And then they can spread that to their kids and other people, and they can keep spreading without making negative progress, and in doing so spread to the whole world over time. So I'm looking to catalyze that. I don't need to be the person to catalyze it. I want it to be catalyzed. And and however that happens, regardless of how many people take over with it and so forth. But until it's catalyzed, then I'm working on it to catalyze it, along with whoever else is working on it. So then there came a time when I was like, all right, I've discovered enough, I have enough clarity that that I'm going to go for it. I want to do a big push. So I'll do about 3 months or 4 months of doing it, including 3 months of twice a week. And so I learned during the time of discovery without the deadline. And now, but there's a different way that my mind is put in a position with doing these live webinars that that pushes it in a different way, but where it's not really like in a wrong type of control. Like it would be the wrong type of control if I needed to get a result that was outside of my control by a deadline. Now, I can go for a result that's outside of my control by a certain time, but with an understanding that I'm going to fully go for it, but because it's out of my control, it might not be reached. Anyway, so that gives some thoughts about that. And when you look at the planting a fruit illustration, then you can see how it's very possible to understand the exact fruit that you want to grow, and then totally go for growing the fruit, and still not have that plant grow because it might be out of your control. Maybe something went wrong with the soil, or maybe there was insects or some kind of disease that got in there. But you can fully go for it, right? And know what you want, and it's okay, and it's only beneficial to understand that it's possible that it might not happen. You don't need to tell yourself it'll definitely happen. It'll definitely happen. You can just understand the situation in a way where you're able to fully go for a result, play to win within boundaries, while understanding that it might not happen with that time frame. But you can also have an open-ended sense to it as well, where we'll see what happens this time. I'll totally go for it, and then based on that, I'll keep at it until I get it. So I'll keep at catalyzing this with people until it happens. But then during this alchemy season, then I'm fully going for it in this way. You're welcome for the shot in the arm. How do you set boundaries in your mind? Mainly by, again, just understanding them. Oh, I'm going to get to scenarios next time. I had it in the slides. I have it on the slides coming up. And so basically, I'll develop things towards this next time. But the short answer is, the more you can distinctly envision things, the more clarity, the more it gets set. And you get clarity, but by default, your mind doesn't operate with scenarios, it's different. By default, your mind kind of gives you images and associations and like thought trains. And your thought will kind of like, you get one thought and another thought, and it'll kind of hop around. And there's a way that you want to realize and learn and develop where it gets easier to think in terms of scenarios, which more mimic how you experience life in your consciousness field, kind of three-dimensionally and with time, and where you can look around and you can develop things in one way, you can develop things in a different way. You can add an element in. What if I took on a partner? What would that look like? Is an example of somebody in the middle of a scenario, right? What if they took over this task? How would that play out? And then you keep working on that, and then you realize, okay, as you play that scenario out, then you realize, oh, I need to make sure they know this in advance, that if this happens, they can come to me and ask me this, or I'm not going to do this thing, that they might come and ask me to do this, and I see how I definitely don't want to do that. Cotton might be thinking about, okay, he has a client, or he might realize it through experience, or however, but once he realizes it through experience, he can play it out in his mind and say, okay, I rank someone number one. They don't get as many phone calls as they thought. And often they do get lots of phone calls, but a particular client might not get as many as they thought. And they might say, well, where's my phone calls? And I realize, wait a second, I'm only going to offer the service of search engine optimization, of delivering them like a taxi driver from where they're at to the first page or near the top or the top of first page of Google. And so I realized that like Cotton can ask himself, do I want to work on conversion for that site? And maybe the answer would be yes, but and maybe it wouldn't, and he would play it out in his mind. And for him, in practice, it's not right now. For someone else, it absolutely could be. We all don't want to have, part of OMG is you don't want to have just one very, very narrow set of instructions and path that you're trying to follow. You can copy someone exactly, but you copy them exactly in order to understand, in order to see if that's the mountain you want to climb, not because it necessarily is, right? You don't know for yourself if that same set of instructions will work for you. But for him, his answer is no, I don't want to work on conversion. For someone else, it might be absolutely, I want to offer that service. But you play it out, and you play out how it would work if you did offer that service as a scenario in your mind through time, and then think how it would work. And then you might think, at first it might not work very well, but then you might think, well, how would I make that work? And then you think of what elements could I add that would make it workable. And you might think, oh, man, I know somebody I could refer them to. And then maybe that was how it would be workable, and that would be the boundary, is I could refer, but I wouldn't do it myself. And that's kind of how you set boundaries, as you start to explore and make distinctions and develop scenarios in your mind. And at some point, you can't understand everything, right? At some point, at the moment, sorry, you can't understand everything in the moment, and there's going to be things about the outside world, so to speak, that you're never going to understand, like what's going on in Zimbabwe right now. And so at some point, you stipulate, and then you move forward. But again, moving forward is part of understanding anyway. Remember, the more you get the distinction that we talk about in this webinar, and the more I get it, I can explain it to you even better, but between understanding and control, the more everything in your life, taking action, thinking, learning, it all becomes, having conversations with people, it all becomes subsumed under understanding, and then you're always making progress, because you realize that as you develop your understanding about important things, and important is anything that leads to more good or dissolves bad, then you're making progress. And sometimes you don't know if something's important. Sometimes you understand, you take action to see if something's important. You're welcome, as I said, Karen, for the shot in the arm, in quotes. Dave Keys, can you speak to practical scenarios for working within the reasons to succeed as you work with the code in the program? Let me think here. Sorry, let me think to understand. Practical scenarios for working with the reasons to succeed. So it's like the reasons why you might want to go. Actually, I think I know what you're saying, and then I do have a very good answer for it. So this is kind of, I think what Dave is asking, Dave Keys. So again, what he wrote was, can you speak to practical scenarios for working with the reasons to succeed as you work within the code in the program? That last part threw me off a little bit, but when you're deciding, do I want to go for this strategic objective or another strategic objective? Do I want to go to try to make $3 million, or do I want to try to go for $10,000 a month, or do I just want to go for ranking a website to the exclusion of all else? I just want to work on ranking a website or a few websites, or what do I want to go for, or go for now, and then I can go for other things later. What I have a very specific thing that I look for, and it's a combination of building blocks and bottlenecks, particularly bottlenecks. I think in terms of what's the next bottleneck. What's the next, and bottleneck is a bit of a metaphor that's larger than just like the idea that there's a narrow, neck and things are trying to get through it. Sometimes a bottleneck could be like a full block obstacle that I have to get through. It might be that I need to have a sales letter written as the next step, because let's say we want to do a launch and affiliates want to promote and they might want to see a sales letter. Then I want to write a sales letter. But then when I think, wait, I want to write a sales letter, I need to have the offer clear. And to have the offer clear, I don't even know what different people in my group are capable of or what they're looking to do. So I need to talk to them. And when I'm talking to them, they might not know the answer right away. So I need to talk to them and then try to get a framework. So the next thing I'm trying to do is talk to people to build a framework for an offer, for what I can then go back to them with, develop, and then I can write a sales letter. So maybe that helps. And the way I figured all that out is I first I think of a final, like some sort of result I know I want, and then I start to either work backwards, or I don't only work backwards. I can work forward, sideways. With scenarios, they're great. You can work in any direction. You can add elements, subtract elements, until I get to what's the most immediate bottleneck, and then I work on that, and I make sure I get that right, and then I build. Then that's a building. Now it becomes a building block instead of a bottleneck, and then I use it to build. Right? I don't do a lot of treading water. If I'm treading water, then I try to get to where I'm not treading water, where I try to make it so that's a bottleneck, right? If I'm treading water, and so like if I was trying to sell people on promoting, and I had a vague idea of the whole offer, then instead of, and it wasn't really working very well, that I was getting people to commit, or even if they would commit in one sense, but it would be hard to schedule it and so forth, and the commitment would just kind of be in theory, then I'd be sort of treading water, right? So instead I'd want to go, as I said, that whole sequence and figure out what's my next bottleneck and get through that and then go to the next and go to the next. And with each next stage, I'm playing to win. I don't think whether I'm going to achieve that, I just achieve it. And you know what? If I were to exercise control within that, then I would and it would be way easier to do. It's easy in theory to not, but suppose I just call each person up and say, all right, make a series about this. It's going to go on in this offer that we're doing, right, for next year. Do it. Then I'm just sort of telling them what to do without really understanding where they're at, where their momentum is right now, what they're particularly comfortable with, right, and so forth. And I might get various results. If I say that, they might say, oh, yeah, I'll do it, Dave. But then they might end up running into a problem doing it, and they might not really do it for a while. And it won't be there, like they won't even realize what's going on. Or they might be doing it, but then they might kind of want to quit, right, and stop working with me. And I won't know what happened a year later when they're like, oh, I found someone else I want to work with. And they won't even, themselves might not even realize what caused it. Or they might fulfill things, but not, because I didn't seek understanding properly with them, we didn't have the sort of breakthrough we needed to really take things to the next level where it was really fulfilling for them. And so members might not get as good as an experience. They might not get as good of an experience. We might not convert as well because when they're on a webinar talking about what they're going to do, they don't have clarity and they're a little worried and they're trying to hedge, right? And they're not able to play to win properly because we didn't have the right clarity to allow them to play to win. So I got control. I got the result I wanted. They were like, yeah, okay, Dave, sure, I'll do that. And I'm like, cool, check. I check that off. I talk to whichever person that I work with, and they're going to do that, and that's all taken care of. I got a sense of closure, but now I'll be struggling, right, in the future because I didn't have really a building block. And so it's actually they're a bottleneck that I didn't break. Hey, the same concept applies to clients too. Absolutely, right. Correct. Understanding the reasons why they're working with you to start with. You go through the scenario, and I talk about this in my client getting series to some degree, but it's always good to keep hitting this from different angles and so you understand it better and better. Is you understand them, you understand yourself, you understand the playing field, like in Sun Tzu's Art of War. You think through the scenario of what's going to happen after you sign them and what will happen next after that. And you might think, okay, I want to send them a report each month, but wait, so what's in the report? And then you might look at what's in the report and then well, okay, that's what I want in the report, then I need to do it. I realize now I need to do a couple of extra things in addition to what I might have thought, right? Or it might have been vague, and so on and so forth. And then you might realize you need to actually learn a new skill before you go and even talk to the client. Not that you want to be doing that forever, but as long as it doesn't, and you don't have to worry about it being a slippery slope, like, okay, wait, but if I do that, am I never going to take action? No. If you're building a clear building block that's a bottleneck on the way to you taking action, it will help you take action. You can get suspicious after a little while, right? If it's been 3 new building blocks that you've built and you still aren't taking action, at some point, just stipulate, okay, I'm going to go take action now. And again, that's how I did with Alchemy. I didn't know that exactly 3 months of working on Alchemy before I committed to doing the webinar series itself was the perfect amount, but it was just at some point it's reasonable, and you stipulate and you take some action, and that'll shed light on things. But sometimes you'll know. Like as long as it's clear that you need the skill before you talk to a client, then that's okay. If it starts to get a little bit silly, and you can spot this. When you're looking at scenarios, as you develop that way, to think that way more and more, then it's easy to make pretty good judgments within reason. You don't need to know everything in order to not slam into a tree. And that might seem like it came out of left field, but think about it. And when you're thinking in terms of scenarios, you can see the big obvious stuff, right? And the big obvious stuff is really, that's what people miss. And if you just don't do things that you could have easily seen coming, like when you're thinking about talking to a potential client and whether you should take action talking to them or whether you should build a skill, then there's going to be some skills that are pretty big and obvious that you need to learn. So you go learn those first, maybe, right? And then you go to talk to, and then at some point it's not going to be that hard to see that you're nitpicking and you're thinking about learning stuff and you don't clearly need it, right? And then you just go and you go start talking to some potential clients in some way, shape, or form. And then it's going to become fairly obvious if you are not really making progress when you're talking to them. Then you can go in and look on the next bottleneck, right? But there's a way when you think in terms of scenarios that you can get plenty far in life. Like you can at least get to a strong, stable base where just doing things that are fairly clear without having to know for sure whether now is the exact right time to talk to the client or whatever. Just like as I said, if you're walking through the forest and you can see clearly and there's not that many trees and you can jog at a certain pace and not trip or run right into a tree. Even if you don't see everything and you don't know the exact right pace to jog and so forth. You just kind of keep it within reason. The law of implication, right? It talks about how focus on what you can know first, right? Like if I'm walking through a forest, I can know that, all right, I want to slow down. If I don't want to trip or slam into a tree, then, all right, I want to slow down to a reasonable pace. I want to look and see the big stuff that I can see. I want it to be not as dark, and so the more I can do to have some light and to slow down, then the better. So I know that, and if you focus there, then you basically just probably won't run into trees, right? And if you skip over that and you don't stop and realize you can have a light and slow down a little bit, and look around, look at your feet, then that's where people just get confused. Take that for how it helps you, and otherwise you can move along. But what I'm trying to say, let me see, is people will they'll end up without realizing it. They'll be asking questions or trying to get a result like immediately that they don't understand. Like if they're saying like, well, how fast should I run when I'm going through that forest? It looks like some other people are running faster. Well, again, you figure out what's your strategic objective. What are your boundaries? If the most important thing for a little while is not to hit the big trees and not to slam into a tree, maybe you can trip a little bit on roots, then you try to get a sense, all right, that's the most important thing, and then I find a speed where I can pretty much clearly achieve that. If you have to run at a certain pace, then you just think, all right, I'm going to run at this certain pace regardless, and then what can I do to minimize hitting a tree or tripping over a root? But I can't control that. If I'm going to prioritize running at a certain pace, then I need to let go of whether I once in a while pop into a tree or trip a little bit. But what can I do to minimize that? I have more light, right, and I have less things distracting me, and so forth. So focus on, whenever you're feeling kind of like something might be wrong, it's generally because you're focused on something, on knowing what you can't know right now, right, like immediately, rather than think about narrowing down the things that you can know. Same thing as I thought of doing this particular webinar. I was like, well, I don't know. The more I think about, well, what are the slides that would be the thing, or the the exact progression of topics and points that are the exact thing that's going to make people feel most like they're getting it, most happy that they want to continue, and while simultaneously learning the most important things. I don't know the answer to that. So instead what I do is I think, well, what do I know? And I just start to accumulate those things. So I know that this topic will be helpful to people. Do I know if it's the most beneficial topic that could possibly be beneficial for that particular person? Do I know it's the thing that'll most excite them? No. But I know I need to cover it, and so I'll start there. And then I'll poke around from there and see, the next thing. And then I might have a few slides, and then I notice, okay, which one do I want to start with? And I might not know for sure, but I can, at least with those three, I can look at them and it narrows things down, that sort of thing. So you focus on what you can know, and then you build from there always. And of course, I'm saying that over and over in different ways. But it's so different from how we are, from the normal way of thinking, weirdly enough. At this point, it seems so, kind of obvious to me. But it's not at all obvious in the moment. And people will pressure you constantly that you should know things and achieve results that are outside of your control. And yet they'll have this moral component, you should achieve it. Or you should, or literally people will communicate to you constantly that you should already have achieved previously something. Right? Even as simple as I should already have done the webinar in a certain way. Right? Or they might not even mean it that way, but we can take it that way because it's kind of ingrained in our culture. And I'm not, if I sound defensive about these webinars, it's not that. I'm just using it as an example because it's what I'm in the middle of doing. Sorry, I know I'm a little bit randomly skipped, but Shima asked, can you expand on these thoughts? Play to win. I noticed when playing cards with young boys recently, when I played to win, I felt cruel. Okay, so this is not a quote from me. This is you. Got it. Okay, that's great. I like that. That's a great thing. Playing to win and caring and being kind could not coexist. I didn't like the feeling, and after I won the game, the boys did not want to play with me. That's awesome. I'm sorry, that's maybe an odd thing to laugh at, but it's such a good example. I'm sorry, I love it. It's a great thing. It'll really help me distinguish. I love when I have specific examples. It's like the opposite of, and again, I appreciate all questions, and I am no way picking on someone that might have asked this, but it helps you to help me better by me saying this, is if someone says, could you provide an example about such and such a topic? Like if someone said, could you provide an example about control versus understanding? I, in essence, already know that I want to provide examples about things I want to talk about, but, and I'll certainly give it a good try if someone asks me that way. But, of course, much more helpful if someone just details a scenario for me that I can get into, then it does half part of the work for me, and I can focus on the other part of the work. Okay, so to continue with this great example. This seems so deep, and I'm sure transfers over to how I play in life. No, absolutely. Of course, it's a trivial example, but it's it's so distinct. It's so easy to picture that it's going to be great. What part of this is masculine, feminine trait? I really can't relate to boys and playing video games and all the violence. Violence in video games, to me, helps feed all the violence in the world. Playing to win feels really charged for me, and I'm sure holds lots of gold once I get underneath what is triggering me. Okay, absolutely. This is terrific. All right. So if I am playing with some boys regarding a video game or a card game, then what I'm doing is looking at the strategic objective right then. It isn't really a win then to necessarily win the game, right? The card game. Now, let's see. Definitely, if other people are playing to win and you're not, then you're kind of dragging things down. Like, it's less fun, right? We've been part of games where we wanted to kind of get into the game. Of course, within only that playing field. We didn't want to, take it outside of the game and start, tackling the person in order to win or whatever. But within the context of the game, we wanted people that we're playing with to kind of take it seriously. Again, within the parameters of the game, because it's not very fun sometimes to be playing a game and have other people, with one foot in, one foot out. Now, when other people just have contradictions in their head, then it creates a dilemma for us, right? So part of life in reality right now is we're dealing with people that have contradictions. And so we need to deal on that level. So if I'm playing a game with people that have contradictions, then I need to, another word is like calibrating, right? I need to find some level at which I can take things seriously, but without triggering off their contradictions or their issues that they might have. The same thing can happen in business, right? You're joint venturing with people. You want to bring out the best in them by taking things seriously. Like when I mentioned vacations earlier. If they feel like it's very important to take vacations, then if you don't, then that can almost be an issue with them, right? So then you might want to, right? With Mike and myself, there's a way in which we're so used to winning by being flexible and being ready when things come up that for a while we didn't really take vacations. At this point, we can treat things a little bit differently, but there's still a way that we are used to playing to win together, and we kind of match each other in that way. And if one of us kind of drops it, then it'll kind of a little bit, the other person kind of has a choice. Do we pick it up? And we will for a bit, but if the other person's going to kind of play at a lower level for a while, then we might take that as a signal and kind of lower things. And so I'm aware of that, and also from just my own perspective, sometimes I kind of, when I give you my own perspective as a member of a team, then careful, I'm not taking credit or being critical when I'm doing that. I'm kind of doing it as one angle in a vacuum, right? When I'm me in a vacuum, if I really want to make sure to win regarding, like if I want OMG to get off the ground, which takes escape velocity because it has an affiliate-based model, and when you're dealing with affiliates, you need to perform at a certain level. And then also with members, the product the coaching needed to be good enough where people are actually succeeding. So with both affiliates and with members, and then with Greg, right, I wanted him to make enough money. Where and he doesn't need to make anything what we're making now, but at least he, a decent amount back then, where he was interested in doing the coaching, right, and taking it seriously. And of course, he would take it seriously regardless once he commits, but of course, long term, right? And none of this, from when I'm talking in a vacuum, none of this is me saying how my partners actually are. Think about it. When you're thinking about, sometimes you want to look at it from a perspective of everyone's going to respond to some degree based on the vectors, the pressures on them. And so I, as a partner, am like a pressure, right? Like how I act, my attitude, my actions, my communications, they're going to pressure other people regardless of who they are. So it has nothing to do with my actual partners when I'm operating from one perspective, not only, but from one perspective, I think of things in terms of operating in a vacuum where like as if the vector that I put on them will affect them, regardless of whether it will or not. I'm trying to be distinct here because it could seem like it's some kind of judgment on another person to say if I go on a vacation, then they'll want to go on a vacation too. I separate things so that I look at minds partly, and people who have minds, as from my perspective, I don't want to put a vector in there that's going to be against what I want if I can help it, even if maybe that person would perform the same regardless, right? It's not a judgment about the person, it's a judgment about the vector that I'm putting, which can look like a judgment about the person. But it isn't, right? It's not a statement about Greg that if I played at half speed, that he might slow it down or something like that. I'm not saying that Greg himself might. I'm just saying that because anyone might, or a vector like that. So we want to. I certainly act as if on one level I act as if the vectors that I have on things, or the way that I play, will influence other people. But partly you calibrate, because if I'm playing to win harder than they are, It's a little bit like if you want someone to walk faster that you're walking next to, or jog faster that you're jogging with. What do? First you jog with them, and then you jog like a little bit faster, right? You pace, and then you lead a little bit and see if they follow. But you don't just like take off in most cases, unless you know the person so well that just taking off is going to work for them, right? Like it will really get them to just take off with you. So there's a certain calibration that I haven't really talked about with playing to win, where if you lead too hard, you'll like snap the line. If I mix metaphors, right? Like it's like with a fish, right? If you reel it in too hard, it could snap the line, or you yank too hard. Instead, you reel slowly. So with these boys, what I would do is I would take it somewhat seriously. I wouldn't be like, oh, this doesn't matter at all, right? Because boys, I don't know what age they are, but pretty clearly these boys were playing in order to fulfill their self-image, right? The reason why a lot of boys, and not only boys, but just to be simple, stereotypes are easy for examples. I'll just state this once here. They're easy for examples because it's quicker to picture than if I were to give an example against stereotypes, then it's harder to keep it in your head. Your stereotype fights against my example, and it's harder to picture. So that's why I'll often use stereotypes in my examples on purpose. Okay, so let's just imagine boys, and they, not excluding girls, but just boys in a vacuum, will be playing in order to enhance their self-image. So what would enhance their self-image? If you're trying, if you're playing seriously, but if they still win, right? Now, ultimately, they're better off coming all the way through it and changing their core so that they don't have that issue. Then you decide whether you want to fight that battle or not, which you very possibly won't, right, at that moment. Or the way to fight it might be the long game, where first you play with them in a way that's good for them right now, and then you slowly, at when times that are opportunities, you help to enlighten them here and there. A 9 and an 18-year-old, great. So you'll have opportunities to enlighten them, and you also want to create conditions in the first place where you can win, right? If it's going to be impossible to play at a level where both the 9 and the 18-year-old are going to feel good, that might be impossible to begin with. And so then somehow playing separately with a 9-year-old and then separately with the 18-year-old, or just doing a different activity, might be the way to go, or you just make the best of the activity as it is. But a little bit like what I mentioned with the Alchemy webinars, I sometimes can't accomplish everything at once. I can't necessarily find, because it's what's objectively going to calibrate for a 9-year-old, or that particular 9-year-old, might be different than what objectively is going to calibrate with the mind of the 18-year-old, in terms of how hard you have to play for them to still get a satisfaction, still feel good about winning, still win and feel good about it. Or maybe you even win, but you don't like smash them so hard that they feel like really bad, right? So it's possible that you could win, but you calibrate back where you don't like win so badly that they really feel like crap, based on the realistic thing of their minds. So regarding business, which is just like this, you play hard enough that's calibrated with the other people, and I didn't really mention that yet. And your question allows me to both mention it and have a ready-made example for explaining it. And I definitely do that. I calibrate in my relationships and in games and wherever. And one thing that helps you calibrate is when your core is such that you're fine regardless, that you're clear on your objective, and you're all right not winning. But you're all right not winning in a way where it's not like, sometimes people are, the general way that people achieve not caring about someone's opinion or not beating that person is by in some way condescending toward that person. They have to put a person in a particular category. As long as you have some category of people where you care what they think in the wrong way, because you have your self-image set up wrong, where that person can like hurt you. If you have two categories, some people that can hurt you, some people that can't, then the only way you can not be hurt by somebody is by putting them in that basically lesser category where they're not a peer, they're not respected in that way. We don't want that. You want to care what people think properly, which is you care so you can help them. and or so you can achieve certain objectives and so forth, but not where it's just kind of irrelevant, sort of caring what they think in order to have the wrong type of feedback, just to feel like you're already smart and already competent. That you want to get rid of, dissolve. Yep, yeah, exactly. So I think I described it pretty well there. So what's triggering you regarding competition is you can have your own sense of how hard you want someone else to play with something, and you don't really want someone to get too far past that, right? We're naturally, like, on the one hand, you want to work with people that are playing like at your level or potentially a little higher, but you then can match them enough. But you don't want to play so far out of your level, right? Just like playing tennis, right? If you want to enjoy yourself playing tennis, then you want to play with someone like at or a little above your level. The thing with tennis is it might not matter ultimately. You might want to do that if tennis matters for your life in some way where winning matters, like if you're a professional. But with your career, it does matter, right? It's going to be easier, right? If you're doing, let's say you're doing the sales aspect of a team, a business partnership, if the person making the product, the offer, is a lower level, then it's going to be harder for you to make the sales, right? And also you're going to probably have to sell it for less money, and so you make less money for your efforts. So obviously when you're doing business, you're better off playing with people that are venturing with people that are at a higher level. Same thing with clients. Even if you're doing consulting, you're not joint venturing, there's still a joint venture nature to it, a collaborative nature. And if you're able to deal with clients who are at a higher level, because you play at a higher level, and Cotton lives the reality of this, is you're dealing with a higher caliber of client, so they actually are more entrepreneurial. They treat you actually better generally than people at a lower level. But the way that you get there is you up your game. And the first way to up your game is to up your focus, right? Up your boundaries, and then you can focus on things. But yeah, you do need to calibrate, and don't get involved with people that are so into it. I don't want to get, I don't get with people that are determined. If people were determined, if everyone I was working with had to have OMG be a certain size company so soon, like by a certain deadline, then I wouldn't necessarily want to, if they have a goal that I don't, then remember, playing to win is relative to a goal. You want people that are going to play to win relative to the same goal that you have, but not necessarily relative to a different goal. So watch out for that, where that's probably the big thing that's happening, is if people are just going after a different goal than you are. But make sure you're going for a goal yourself, an objective yourself that you can build on. That's how you decide what to go for, is what you can build on, what you can stand on, what relationships you want to have in your life. Can you build from there? Even taking on a client that might be lesser or more difficult to deal with, if you can build off of that, if that's giving you a building block, then good, right? Then that might be worth it. So hopefully that gets things started, and I'll probably give this some more thought and see what else this sparks for me. Okay, we're looking at about 2.5 hours here, so I'll wind down soon. Thomas asked, David, can you speak how you would approach a scenario if spouse is struggling with the fear of a family member or pet passing away, or maybe passing away soon, how we quell their fear with this continued understanding of the alchemy we have? Oh, super, I'm glad. Yeah, exactly, right. So you don't lead too hard and too fast. I'll just finish your question. How we quell their fear with this continued understanding of the alchemy we have, or not really quell their fear, but best help them to understand that we are just expressing empathy to the current situation in their mind, but we're not trying to change them or force our mindset down their throat. Right, excellent. Yeah, you do it with kind of the reeling in the fish thing of you first meet people where they're at regardless, right? This is pacing and leading. This is from neuro-linguistic programming. Just to give credit where credit's due. It's not like I didn't develop it, although I really use it. It's one of the things I took out of, I don't think neuro-linguistic programming is the end-all be-all as a science or as kind of a practice, but it's useful. But one of the big useful things is looking at things in terms of pacing and leading. And so the solution to how you lead someone to where you want to get them is you first get in their worldview. You get into their neuro-linguistic programming says the map is not the territory. that's kind of an approximation or a model that helps remind us that other people's view of the world is not the same as reality, and neither is your view of the world the same as reality. We have maps. And so you want to get a sense of their map, or where they're standing in their map. Or if you're leading someone out of a maze, or even if you're just giving someone directions if they don't have GPS or something. All these metaphors I used to use of giving directions is less relevant these days with GPS. No one calls anyone for directions anymore. But let's say someone's GPS broke and they're calling you for directions to get to your house. The first thing you have to do is find out where they are, right? You don't just talk about your house and where it is in a vacuum. You figure out where they are. And where someone's at is also like emotionally and everything, right? And the thing with people is where they're at. This is something that you, as an alchemist, can know that other people don't know. This master key idea, this idea of the standards and norms, is nuts as you take this on more and more with yourself and with other people. You see, like, it's not their mindset that's the issue. When you try to deal at the level of mindset, and of course mindset can mean different things, and it could mean standards and norms, but often it'll mean something other than that. If you try to change someone's mindset about how they feel about a spouse, like a parent or something dying, then the problem is if you're not dealing at the level of standards and norms, then they're really going to not like it, because they're going to feel like they should feel that, and you're going to be telling them that they shouldn't, and you're kind of like fighting, like you're fighting their standards and norms, but without operating on that level. So you're kind of struggling against it, but never you're not going to win. They're going to feel in that case like you're telling them how to do something immoral, like you're telling them how to rob from a store or something if they feel like robbing from the store is really immoral, or if you're telling them how to sneak out of a restaurant without paying, then how would they react to that? Even if you were telling them a correct, not a morally correct, but a strategically correct, tactically correct way to sneak out of a restaurant without paying where you wouldn't get caught, then a lot of people wouldn't like to hear it, including myself, basically, right? Because that's against my morals. That's against my standards and norms. So it'll feel to them like you're actually telling them how to do something immoral because they feel like it's moral. Standards and norms are equivalent to someone's morals. Like anything about they feel like literally they should feel that, or they feel like they should care about their parent, which I agree with, but they feel like in order to care, they have to feel pain about that person passing away. And then they fear the pain, right? But that they feel the pain that they have to feel, and so on and so forth. So, and how do you change someone's standards and norms? To show them how to change them themselves, that's what alchemy is for. That's what I'm doing with you right now in phase 2. And the other thing you do is you surround them with messages that are different, but that are subtle, right? If someone joins a club with people that are cool and seem loving and caring, and all those people ditch out of restaurants, then perhaps it might feel more normal to ditch out of a restaurant unless that person had a strong standard and norm. Right? When a kid goes to college, then their standards, all their standards and norms get jacked to heck, and they're all reset, right? Basically, unless they're particularly anchored or something like that. So, different ways to change standards and norms. You surround them. That's what I do in OMG. I surround people with entrepreneurial standards and norms. Literally, there's not even any employees in OMG. One day, maybe there'll be some for something small, but their standards and norms are so powerfully surrounded with an entrepreneurial mindset, right? From the coaches, from other members, and so forth. I would filter out people with a no refund policy who are less in that mindset. I tell people as one of the caveats that it's important for people to be an entrepreneurial mindset. They're not just going to be handed something because it's not possible, and that changes people's standards and norms. That are in OMG, a coaching program, and then naturally people feel different about their morals, about what they're motivated, about how things should be, and that's critical because otherwise all the instructions in the world aren't going to really help somebody, no matter how correct. It would help some people, but it'd be a tiny percentage of the people that succeed now. Ultimately, to help someone get under their standards and norms, you do what we're doing here, which is we get something so fundamental that it gets beneath our self-image standards and norms, all these shoulds and ideas. We realize that our mind is not us, where those standards and norms came from, and we need an alternative, so it's not a flying leap into the great unknown, right? We'll get something solid and that feels right and feels good, rooted even in things I've already told you, foundationalism, seeking to dissolve contradictions, to understand, to have max happiness for yourself and other people. Once we see that, and when we build off there, then that gets underneath our standards and norms, and then someone can let go of things like that, where they can care about their loved one while they're alive. They can fully wish that person was still alive in a certain way, but without being afraid of them passing away, perhaps. And of course, but and so forth. Like, you can show someone how to think through being afraid by, okay, so you're afraid, they pass away, and then what do you do? But then they still feel like that's immoral, right? Like it's robbing a restaurant. Yep, great. Excellent. So that was a great question. All right, I'll pretty much wind it down here. I plan on looking back over all these threads over time and having some question and answer sessions. I want to get to a certain place before we do some kind of heavy. We'll probably do some dedicated Q&A where I catch up on some questions and take a look over them. But I want to kind of get to a certain point before doing that, just like on an individual webinar I do that also, where I get to a certain point. But overall, I want to get to a certain point first. So I'm prioritizing that, and then I'll continue to try to get to all the questions. All right. Well, thank you guys once again for participating. So ludicrously powerful. Thank you. That's wonderful, David. Discovering what's true versus we're making up our reality all the time. What's the difference? Great. That's a good one also as we continue. And we'll be exactly dealing with all that as we continue in phase 2. I can try to give you a sense that the problem with the whole heaven and hell thing, and again, I focus on what I know. I don't know exactly what will happen, but I know, for example, that like clearly, for example, kids, or we stipulate that I mean, everything about what we know about the world is that sometimes like infants die, right? So if an infant dies, and if there was this idea of we have one life on earth and then there's a judgment and then either someone goes to heaven forever or hell forever, then where does the infant go? And the problem is, no matter what we answer, it doesn't make sense. If the infant goes to heaven, then that means that infants all go to heaven, but at some point something happens in someone's lives where they have a risk of going to hell. Clearly, I would say if that was the case, we should kill infants, all of them, because if killing someone, all it means is they go to heaven, definitely, versus keeping them alive gives them a chance to go to hell forever, then there's no purpose to being alive. The only thing that being alive would do for you is get you to hell, potentially, right? Which there's no good to that, right? The only benefit is you have an opportunity to go to hell versus definitely go to heaven. So that makes no sense, and yet that's the worldview of mainstream Christianity. I'm a mainstream Christian in the sense that I believe that Jesus is God, but that can't be right? There's just an inherent contradiction there. So it's not that I have an answer, it's just that something in that scheme wouldn't be the answer. If it was the case that I was in either heaven or hell and I was aware, like if I had any sort of either I have no free will, in which case there's literally no meaning to anything. So there's no point in saying what you would do. You do nothing. If you have no free will, there is nothing to do. But if I had any free will, including in heaven or in hell, then I'd be seeking to get things right. Same as now, right? So it would be the exact same thing as now. There'd be good and there'd be whatever there was, and then I'd be looking to make things perfect. And then if I had no free will, it wouldn't matter anyway. So as long as I have free will, then I'm looking to catalyze things being perfect. And as long as I don't have free will, then it's irrelevant. So that's what I know. You see, and therefore, and then it doesn't really matter. If someone put a gun to my head, I would say, I guess it would seem that there would have to be some sort of multiple lives that people have, because otherwise dying as infants doesn't make much sense, or whatever. But then the answer is the same no matter what. The answer is I seek to understand I focus on what I can know, and I look to catalyze things being perfect, plus having more good on top of that, and more good being created. I like questions I already know the answer to. That one I knew the full answer to, believe it or not. Kill the infants. Yeah, right. Glad I am used. I know how to make Andrew laugh now whenever I need to. Just talking about killing infants, and then I get a big laugh. But yeah, of course I'm not advocating that, but it's kind of wacky. I cannot miss these talks for nothing. It's 4 a.m. That's awesome, Michael. That's terrific. And I'm glad. I appreciate being on live. If there's been plenty of people on, but if we got below a certain number, I guess it would have less energy probably for me and for other people. But there's great energy on these, so thank you so much. Right. And the other thing is, right, we can't judge. One thing, David. The other thing is, Keys, and this is important. I've referred to this before, but it's I can say it quickly because it's easy. I do not judge anybody, including government people and so forth, in general. I don't judge people in general, period, no matter who they are, Hitler or whatever. You can and must judge ideas and actions when you can, when you know, right? When you cannot know, you don't judge, period. And so overall, we don't know where a person started. We don't know how far they came. Maybe Hitler, given another 100 years, would have figured things out, right, and been an incredible guy, right? And again, I just use that iconically more than him as a person or whatever. And so, kind of in a sense, it doesn't make that much more sense to judge an infant than to judge Hitler in the sense of what if they just had more time, right? And we don't know where people start, where they're getting. There's a way that no one's figured all that out, of course, including me, by far. And so, we don't judge people overall. It just doesn't make anything close to sense. But we can judge what we do. We might not want to associate with certain people. We might, if there's a gun to our head, quite literally, we might need to shoot the other guy, right, first. But if there's some kind of deadline, right? If there's not a deadline, I don't really want to kill anybody, essentially. If the time pressure, like they might just keep killing or something like that, and it's pretty obvious, then you make the best judgment you can when there's time pressure. But it's never my first choice to kill somebody, but neither do I say it's always wrong to use violence, because that would be pretty hypocritical, right? When we live in a peaceful world, because various crazy people are kept at bay in various ways, then I'm not going to say that violence is always wrong. In the moment, under time pressure, it might be the best guess at the time. And then but basically, fundamentally, never ever judging anyone overall. And that's easy for me because I can see how it's kind of obvious not to do that. But then we can judge ideas, we can judge contradictions. I can say this action. I can judge policemen in a sense, but not overall as people. But the system, like swearing to obey orders, no matter what they are, and in practice, I mean, understanding that I understand individual policemen have boundaries, but they're wider than I would have, than I believe they should be with individual property rights. So anyone in even the military who's sworn to obey orders, right? Anyone who's currently in the U.S. military is basically Obama's assassin, right? I mean, it boils down to they're going to follow Obama's orders, whatever those are. I understand that certain orders might not be followed, but it's a little bit like hypnosis. You're so biased towards following orders, and there's so much of a not questioning thing, right? That fundamentally your job is to obey orders to someone that you don't even pick and that might change. And so that inherently I would say is a bad idea. But I don't judge the person overall, none of them, or even close, really. It's just for their own sake, we have to judge ideas. We might pick how and when, just like with Thomas's question about his wife and someone who might die, I might pick the time and the place to point out to someone that being a cop or a military member might not be a good idea. But there's times when it isn't a good idea, just like it's not a time when it's not a good idea. And I question when I do it. It's a little bit like, the feeling Thomas would have if he said to his wife, maybe you shouldn't feel afraid or bad about someone, your relative, dying. I don't enjoy saying that there's something inherent within people working for the government that is wrong, because it might not be the right time and the place for it. On the other hand, if I never say it, again, it's like a gun to my head in a metaphorical sense of what, if I do say it, damned if I do, damned if I don't. But I want to emphasize that I don't judge a person as a whole. We should have compassion towards people as a whole, and we want everyone to, including myself, to figure out the bad ideas in their mind and dissolve them, right? The contradiction, and that's true for everyone, including someone that's overtly doing something we can spot that's bad. But we all have contradictions in our mind that we want to get rid of, but we do at the same time want to shoot for perfection, and with ourselves, though, and with ideas. But with other people, that's up to them. Right, Megan, right. Red velvet pancakes at the griddle on Sunset and Fairfax. It cures anything. All right, I'll keep that in mind. But then I'm not supposed to. I can have carbs after the webinar. That's good. On Mondays, it's at night. I have to go the whole day without eating. I mean, of course I could, but then it does make a difference. I even see it physically, like, because with the inflammatory nature of some things, or even like the joints can feel more different. But I certainly eat them otherwise at times. For some people, their life might be equally as good without eating certain foods, but with me, I was joking. There's a fun way to look at things. Who was I talking to? Oh, I was talking to a friend, not an OG. Well, anyway. But I was saying it's kind of funny with certain diets. You could reverse it. I think I mentioned this at some point, and I do think that eating healthy, of course, is probably better than not. But you could say like what if you had a method where you could rest in a certain way for 2 hours, and then all your food would taste way better. That would be a good product, right? So I show you how to rest for 2 hours in a certain way. That's fun, and all your food tastes way better the whole day. Every time you do that, right? That's kind of but it's an interesting thought exercise, because if you reverse it, a lot of what people that are advocates for eating healthy say is you have more energy, or you have like an extra couple of hours in a day of energy if you eat all these foods. But for me, realistically, good healthy, like eliminating certain things, like we're talking about the butter and maple syrup on the pancakes. It's just true for me, and maybe there's a way to rewire things fundamentally over time, but even that would take time and struggle. And I've done it even for like 30 days, but it still is the case that I have it tastes better. I have a better eating experience when I eat, when I open myself up to certain foods like that, than if I close myself off. Than otherwise. Not every time, and there is a cost, but it means you have less energy. Right, but there you go. So food tastes better, but you sleep an extra 2 hours. But pretty funny, right, with the framing. Isn't that? I find that fascinating, or clever, if I might break my own arm, patting myself on the back. I'm not saying that as a reason to eat badly, and I'm myself saying that I eat particularly well on days when I have a webinar, because I think it affects the function of your mind and so forth. But and certainly if you're tired and low energy and having a sugar crash, then it definitely affects my performance. But it is a fascinating thought exercise, right? And it's also a good exercise for conversion and thinking about marketing, right? You can sell a product. Well, I mean, of course you couldn't. People would be upset afterwards. You told them, just eat my pancakes with real butter and tons of maple syrup, and then you can sleep for a couple of hours extra. Plus your food tastes better than if you eat all sprouted grains. Do you guys like that one? You're welcome, Rick. Rick writes, great info as always, David. This is for the recordings. You know why I read some of these, by the way? Is a fun little psychological thing. There was, as an example, I'm sure this is duplicated other times, but there was a debate with Reagan and Mondale. This was in a recent book I was reading. It might have been in Social. It might have been a different book that you guys recommended. I read it because you recommended. But I tend to read books like this anyway, so it jumbles together. But there was Reagan and Mondale. There was a time in there was a debate, and it was close at the time. It ended up being a landslide, of course. Reagan obviously won and became president, and it was the 1980 election, I believe. No. No, it was obviously 84 because it's Carter. Anyway, so they were in a debate, and the issue of age came up, and Reagan had that famous response where he said, like, because the question was whether Reagan was too old, right, to continue again for another term, and then it was asked by the moderator about the question of age, and of course the moderators are against Reagan. So they subtly, put in these things. And Reagan said, no, I won't hold my opponent's youth and experience against him, right? And the place erupted in laughter. And Mondale himself said that was the moment he knew that he wasn't going to win the election. But the fascinating thing is that people that listen, and it all made sense, but people who listen to it on the radio as a psychological experiment later, if you show them it on video and versus if you show them on the radio, they have a totally different experience, and they'll actually say that Mondale won the debate, or that they couldn't tell, or they'll just be much more likely to say that either Mondale won the debate or something similar. Whereas people that listen to it televised, and because basically maybe I'm saying it wrong with the radio. I'm sorry. That was I'm mixing two examples. The radio one was with, I believe it was Kennedy and Nixon was with the radio, because the visual was massively different. It's actually, if they listen to it as a psychological experiment without the laugh, with the laughter taken out, then they say differently about who won that exchange or the debate. So without hearing the laughter of other people, it's a totally different experience. And so I keep that in mind if people are listening on an MP3 and they don't see the feedback on the screen. It's not like they'll be thinking, oh, there's a terrible webinar, but there's something to sometimes just actually hearing some of the feedback as positive that has a literal effect where you can't get the same effect without it, like at least like a feeling, like the feeling of the effect. And the feeling helps, right? Because the feeling of feeling good about these recordings and webinars will, of course, make you feel like listen, and not even consciously, right? Your feelings come from your mind, which is outside of you, which you don't control fully. And so if you get a good feeling from one recording, then it's easier to listen to the next ones, which you actually want, right? You want to feel like listening to future recordings, and reading like Rick's statement out loud will actually literally contribute to that. So he wrote, great info as always, David. I'm using each webinar as building blocks and really trying to implement these life-changing nuggets into my current life and the lives of others. And I'm already seeing positive real-life results for myself and others. Awesome. Love it. I'm so glad to hear it. Yeah, the system is horrible. I agree. As Dave wrote, as we were referring to before with government and stuff, it's kind of whatever you want to do. You want to try to protect people and so forth, and you end up having really no choice but to agree to obey orders of people and so forth. So I agree. And that's, again, why I don't judge. It's not that we want to judge, but we do want to judge ideas so that, like, if we look at a cluster of ideas, like serving the military is a cluster of ideas, good and bad. If we look at the cluster and say it's all good, then we can't have a hope of teasing out the good and the bad ideas, right? Does that make sense? And so forth. Way more productive when not eating carbs. Agreed, Lowell. Right, true. Yeah, and so you can look at life as, but pretty much after you sleep, I would say it's mostly over. I mean, I know it accumulates too to some degree, and it kind of acts like a drug. That's great. Sorry, I was referring to something else on the screen for a second. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff with carbs. I'm not an expert, but it can add up over time, and supposedly if you stop eating them, then you don't crave them. The trouble is, it's the same way with coffee with me. The trouble is I enjoy coffee, so and it literally helps me to sit there with a notebook and focus. The whole experience of it and going out and doing it, and I like that experience. And I've tried it both ways. So I can get it where I don't crave it because it's not an addiction if you get off it for a few days, right? It creates like a temporary addiction, right, if you're on coffee. But it's easy to get off of. You just don't do it for a few days. You have a massive headache for half a day or a day or so, and you sleep extra, but then you're over it. And I've done that, and I can do that where it's not an addiction. But then just thinking about it objectively without it being an addiction, then I'm like, well, you can end up cutting pretty much everything out of your life except for the most theoretically productive activities, but life just consists of more than that, right? I don't know. And then there's priorities, right, and so forth. So, yeah, I don't. I don't have an issue. But just for me, what you can do is pay attention, understand that life is about a series of performances. Sorry, not life, but your like income, for example, or certain results are very alinear in the sense that there's just like these webinars, right? What really matters is how I do all these webinars. I can be low energy all the rest of today if I want, as long as I was high energy on this webinar, right? And overall, it doesn't matter so much, unless I had some important things which I might, to do as well today, and then I would need to be high energy for those. I try to make sure I'm available. For me, I don't need to exactly be high energy, but I need to be rested and calm and confident, where it's important that I live a life. Like some people, they need to have good nutrition. It's pretty important for the way, like their career. I don't just mean athletes, but for various things they do, it might just take stamina. For me, it actually doesn't. I don't need stamina, and that's good because I'm not really a stamina-based person. But what I need to be able to do is always be ready, which means I can't have things screwing with me in my life. Like my home life is very stable and supportive. And I don't really have things messing with me. I don't have little dings going off. I don't even live a life where my phone can go off or tag me, or this can ping me and that can ping me, because that can mess with your flexibility and aware. I need to, at a moment's notice, be able to come in with the right attitude and the right mindset, the right problem solving, and come in like a calm, confident hammer. Other people need stamina for what they do. And also, I'm comfortable. I'm good at that type of thing naturally, and I'm not good at stamina. And so I designed kind of a career for myself where I could do that, and that works for me. For other people, they design a career where stamina is what matters, and it doesn't so much matter about a particular moment, but instead what matters is delivering. So for me, time management is not relevant, and the stamina way of getting a lot of things done. For me, time management, again, matters in the sense that I'm always ready. If there's ever a crisis, or if someone just calls and they want to work through an idea, I'm ready and able to do that with focus, with clarity, and with focus. Whereas most other people are not ready to do that, like at most any time, which is okay because it's not their career is not based on it. For me, it is, but the benefit is that I don't need to just go and go and go. I can be focused kind of on call, and then I can have time free and be working on ideas otherwise. And that works great for me. With other people, it's much better to have this different type of time management where they can have 12 hours of productivity of a certain sort, excuse me, and that validly and genuinely is the way to go for those people. And when you're thinking about time management for yourself, and I'm just saying these things, the discussion is not a time to be structured, right? I'll often revisit these things in structured lessons, but just as they occur to me in context, and while I have the energy for it, I just say. But so time management is very much, should not be one size fits all, even with the deep assumptions. You see, that's not, what I just said there is not just like not one size fits all, but you can really deeply rethink how you think of time management depending on different fundamental styles, right? I mean, it's so radically different the way that I do my career, right? Where I'm pretty much always ready to come in properly. I'm like almost never in a bad state. It'll happen in very rare cases. I remember there was one time when there was a webinar I just started. An affiliate wanted me to change like an iframe to autoplay. I didn't know how. I was Googling the code. At the exact same time, Mike called, and Mike was totally understanding. He was great about this. But he was like, it was like kind of an urgent thing that had come up with a choice, a decision regarding something else with a totally different affiliate. And it was literally within the same 5 minutes. And I was unable to deal with Mike's question for a few. I said I need 5 minutes, and he was great with it. But it was almost surprising him because it's so rare that I'm unable to deal with something. But it just happened in the 5 minutes. There's nothing I could have done about that, and it was understandable. But normally, whatever comes up, if something's urgent, I can deal with it right then. Or when it's just the right time for someone else to work on brainstorming or figuring out an idea because they're bottlenecked, I can break it. So I can constantly break bottlenecks, be aware of things like that. And it's very effective for me. And then I actually have a lot of time that's flexible, that I can work on ideas or do whatever. But someone looking at me might look like I had like all this free time. But then if I take it up, that's why for me vacations are an anathema, because then I'm inflexible and unable to come in when it might be very necessary during a certain time. But for other people that just do consistent work, a vacation can make perfect sense. But for me, I might let someone down at just the wrong time. And then if I did that, then they would be looking to see, not on purpose, but they would be looking to see the different type of output that I don't want to have to do, which is like that, looks like I spent 12 hours doing a task, and here's my 12 hours of outputs to show for it. I don't want to have to play on that playing field. And I avoid that by playing on a different playing field that I'm very effective at, you see. And again, that works for me, but it wouldn't work for everyone. But you have to get that deep, in essence, in order to figure out time management for yourself, rather than just books on time management tend to just assume that someone's day is cluttered with a bunch of busy tasks, and such a person couldn't do what I do, for example. And some version of what I do might be relevant for various people. And many people that I'm in no way a boss of anybody, but I roughly speaking, for the categories we have, I've served that function of sort of something like management or design or resolving things, making final decisions. Often people in that situation, they're busy in a sense that you almost always can't bother them, or they might snap or have an issue or not be in the right state when they need to. Someone needs them, and that's a problem. I'm constantly never in that state, and that's why people like Cotton and Mike and Greg and everyone else keep working with me in a way that's kind of a no-brainer for them. I'm not saying they wouldn't otherwise, but it makes it so easy for them. Right, there are things that are objectively evil. That's why I talk about property right, individual property rights. But then there's a lot of things that are right that are supposedly right or wrong. They're just cultural BS, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in either direction. Okay, excellent. I'm glad I ended up, of course, more than 2.5. Did another half an hour of talking about stuff, but wonderful. Brilliance on demand. Right. Mike has a phrase for brilliance on demand, that he wants to solve an issue or figure out a seed content for an email, at which point Mike does an incredible job after that writing them. Play to win requires brilliance on demand, at least for me, right? Again, different people have different functions and ways they can design things, but then I manage to design things almost a little bit intuitively, not even, I can't take credit for doing it all exactly on purpose. But I'm just not a stamina person, but yet coming in just in the right way, realistically great at it, you know, in the way I've designed things for me to do. And it's funny, right? By recognizing that, if you don't recognize that in a distinct way, then you can easily take on that you should do both, that you should also have stamina. When you realize what you do, you can also let go of people's shoulds, right? Other people's ideas what you should do. Only found on the Alchemy channel. Stay tuned for updates. That's awesome. Okay, guys, I really will end it here. Thank you so much. Coming in for some, hey now. That's great. You're very welcome, guys. And have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. And those of you who are up in the middle of the night, you get an extra applause. But even those of us who it's during our day, then we're still probably canceling appointments with our family or doing whatever. So I do appreciate you guys coming on live when you do. Take care, guys. Ooh, I got some capital letters. Wow, another great alchemy. Thanks, David Mills. Wow and great alchemy, both capitalized. You're all very welcome, of course, everybody.